Are we live? I think we're live. We are live. Okay, let me just straighten this up and get rid of that. Not that. That's even worse. Worse and better. All right, people. How's everybody going? How's everybody doing? Another Sunday night stream. Hold on. Something's going to drive me crazy. There we go. Symmetrical. Good evening. Sunday evening, which has this has become the ritual of the Sundays, and it's quite a beautiful thing. Okay, what is everybody doing these days? Yeah, okay, whatever. If you notice something about my face, my lips are tremendously chapped because I was without Lipsil for the better part of the day, and I've become so addicted that my lips immediately get chapped, and then I lick them more. It's a vicious circle of lip chappedness. It is going to be an amazing stream tonight. We're going to try something different, everybody. So the format, we're going to try to stick to shorter segments per subject matter. And now that I see a super chat comes in, I'm going to see if what I have set up as part 2 of the different structure for tonight is going to work. I knew it was not going to work. I do not see the super chats on the sub window. So I'm not sure that I'm going to get to address the super chats later on without just taking pictures of the super chats as I've been doing. So we're going to try to do like shorter segments per subject and then take the super chats at the end, which I don't think is going to work. So we might have to work them in between segments, which might still be good itself, but definitely shorter segments per question so we can get to more questions. And tonight, I mean, have we had a week in the last 2 months that has not been law-shattering? It's madness. There will never be a quiet week, at the very least, until all of the post-election lawsuits are settled. If anybody's wondering, this is not an ad, but you're going to see me drinking kombucha tonight to stay hydrated. Oh, I saw someone who said in the chat that I'm going to be on Joe Rogan within a year. I can do that if they do it virtually, because I don't know when our borders are going to open up with any other neighboring country. Missed a bunch of super chats, so we're going to see if we can do this. Volk Revel says, Viva Fry live stream on BitChute. YouTube is going to wreck itself. I've got, so far, I mean, for anybody who doesn't know, I'm also uploading, I think there's an automatic upload to BitChute. I don't know who set it up. It wasn't me, but I think everything's been uploading to BitChute. I'm uploading to Rumble as well. The only thing with Rumble is I can't upload the streams because they're only on YouTube. But I'm diversifying the platforms in case YouTube ends up destroying itself with what it's doing. But yeah, so stay tuned. Follow me on Twitter. I have a second channel on YouTube, Viva Family, which at least if something happens, I can get notifications out through Twitter, Facebook, whatever. But branching out, Rumble is a very good alternative. It's like a small YouTube without the censorship. Dan Bongino's on it. Devin Nunes has a channel on it, and it seems to be growing a lot. From a cynical perspective, their CPM, the cost per mil, like the amount, the pennies you get per 1,000 views, is much higher than YouTube based on their advertising, but it's a much smaller platform. Robert Dale, good evening. What do we got here? The Real Bambuga says, you missed my 90-second super chat. It was 93rd last super chat, Bambuga. How you doing? I hope everybody's doing well. Little Rock, up here working again, and we've been waiting on you guys, looking at those oyster shells. I have such mental issues. I ate the oyster shell. I ate the oysters at this market in Jean Talon. They're fresh as anything can be. Within 10 minutes, I thought I was going to die. I could feel my stomach in knots, and I thought I was getting some sort of toxic poisoning. They were delicious. And no, I didn't get poisoning. Rose Meehan, welcome. Members. For everybody who doesn't know, YouTube takes 30% of the chat. For YouTube membership, it's $5 a month, and YouTube takes 30% of that. But you get sneak peeks. You can support us on Patreon, Subscribe Star, all those other PayPal, and so on and so forth. Castillo, testing. Nice to see you again. Bambuga's back in. You got Dark Knight Joker lips. Yeah, they are so red, and the white light doesn't help. Okay, and I see Barnes in the house. So that we're going to try to do that tonight. We're going to do segments. Maybe I'll do super chats in between segments. I'll still do my best to bring them up. I hope it doesn't distract anybody. On the menu for tonight, I should mention before we get started, I'm going to just get to my notes. No, screenshots. I believe I took a picture of this. So much. Hunter Biden scandal. Don't start licking your chops yet, because I'm less interested in the actual content of the unverified emails. I'm more interested in some of the legal questions that I had regarding that entire situation. that's going to lead us into Section 230, Justice Thomas's advisory opinion, which I have questions on as well for Robert. Social media censorship, which goes into the next question, election litigation, McAfee indictment, Rittenhouse updates, debate preview, the Denver shooting. We've got interesting questions on that, and then we're going to take as many questions as we can. Jordan Peterson's legal fights. I have to follow those. You usually watch these later at 1.5 to 2 speed. You seem kind of drunk. Okay. Well, I am certainly not, because I don't drink alcohol on a great many streams for that very reason. Don't want anybody thinking I'm drunk even when I'm not. Can you ask Barnes to give a review of the Ted Cruz new book? Okay, that might be the earliest segment, the earliest reference to a book we've ever had. 5 minutes in, notifications are going to be slow. There is no question the notifications are so slow. Some people get them tomorrow morning. David Harrington, €5. Keep it up, guys. Trump 2020, love from the UK. Thank you very much. Okay, let's do it. Bring in Barnes in. He's looking dapper. He's got a cigar. Let's see this here. Bring in, add to stream. Robert, how goes the battle?
Good.
Okay, so we're going to try it, Robert. I can't, the super chats we might have to do in between segments, get a few of them. Sorry, standard intro. If we don't get to your super chats, don't be miffed. If you're going to be miffed, don't do the super chat. We do our best. It's to support the channel. We split them. Robert and I split them 50-50. It is an indication of support. We thank you for them. And it's a good problem to have, but we can't get to all of them. Oh, okay, Robert. What do we start with? Let's start with one piece of news. There was an article on the Amy Cooper situation. Is there any update you can share publicly above and beyond the article that I read in the New York Post, which was there's a second call that she placed to the police indicating that she had been assaulted, or she said she was assaulted in that second recording. Is that recording public yet or no?
Two things with that. The extent of my comment on it is it's going to be limited mostly. The New York Times corrected that story. There was an initial story that she made a second call. She never made a second call. That was a inaccurate story. There were some publications that were reporting that falsely. They were going to be subject to libel suit, but the New York Times quickly issued a correction and retraction. The Associated Press quickly issued a correction and retraction. Note, there was no second call by Amy Cooper to anyone. So there was no second 911 call. So that was a misunderstanding. That was the prosecutor never said that in court. For folks out there, you are immune if you accurately report what happens in court. But if you inaccurately report it, like pretty much every newspaper and publication did in this case, then you can be sued for libel, because it's called the fair reporting privilege. It's a defense. It's not an absolute immunity. And you have to fairly report. You have to accurately and fairly report what was said in the court proceedings. This is why if a court case is filed, anyone can go out and quote what was in the court case, quote what's in the complaint, quote what was in the indictment, and they cannot be sued in pretty much any state in the country. Now, some jurisdictions are different around the world on that. But in the United States, you can't. But if you inaccurately, if you just jump to conclusions like one New York Times headline did, and then you can be sued quickly and easily. But yeah, they made a mistake. They've corrected that mistake. Other people came forward and made clear that was inaccurate. But the rest I cannot comment on at this point. So she had the arraignment is postponed for a month. And I believe that it is possible that a just resolution will happen in the case. But beyond that, I'll have a lot more to say on this down the road.
Okay, amazing. And it's very interesting because the video I put out yesterday on John McAfee is the risks of saying things when he had no pending litigation, but it was certainly, if not imminent, it was inevitable. And you say things online that you can never take away, and not that he would, but that's why I appreciate it. And I don't like going too far into pending cases. And just an interesting side note, I was having a discussion with someone talking about that very same second reported call. And I said, look, I'm going to wait, first of all, until I hear the call before I trust someone reporting on what the DA said was expressed in that call. I said, I'm going to wait to hear it. And if I now confirm there's been no second call, that certainly eliminates waiting to hear for it. So that's interesting to know.
The other big news was the DA put on the record in the court proceedings that she corrected very quickly when the police arrived. Remember, there was an initial story that said no police showed up and that she just ran off and that something terrible could have happened here. Not all of that was always false. She waited for the police to arrive, made sure that they understood what happened. They had a clear understanding of what happened. She explained with the police directly that whatever confusion existed previously, that she didn't believe he was assaulting her or planned on that when she had some time to reflect on everything, was able to explain it all. And so she made clear everything that happened at the scene. So to the police live. So all of these false stories by Ice Cube and other people who just assumed she made a 911 call and then ran off to cause, all wrong. All of it was.
I will be rubbing this in somebody's face after the stream tonight. Just the second call, because like I said, okay, I hadn't heard it. It's curious. It reads like what it reads, but I'll wait to hear it. And now I don't have to wait to hear it. And for people who don't know who Amy Cooper is, she's the Central Park Karen, in quotes. She got into a fight. She's a white lady, got into a fight with a black man in Central Park because she had her dog off a leash. He was bird watching, and she called the police, said an African-American man is threatening me in the ramble. I did at least 2 videos on it, maybe only 2 videos. It's an interesting situation. Check it out. You can watch the videos, and I'll do a follow-up. I have no insider information from Robert. I like it that way. I don't want it because I don't even want to accidentally say something I'm not supposed to know, but I'm going to do a follow-up as soon as there's any news on that. The Hunter Biden emails have been verified by others on the email threads, and the Bidens have not denied they are hunters. Okay, first, this is our first topic. It's going to have like subcategories. What the heck? So where do we even start with this? I think we should start with, I don't want to get too far into the substance of the emails because they're not verified in a technical sense. It didn't come from WikiLeaks. But let's just, if we go over the overview, the glossing over, 30,000 foot overview of what's allegedly in those emails, what they allegedly show, before we get into the legal questions.
Sure. So there's multiple layers of context here. And so the question is where to start with context. We'll start with the granular and then move up to the global. On the granular side, a laptop that is reported to be Hunter Biden's laptop, a copy of that laptop was turned over by a repairman in Delaware to Rudy Giuliani, who then apparently let Steve Bannon know about its existence, and that in turn led Steve Bannon to apprise the New York Post of its existence. And ultimately, the contents of that, or at least partial contents of the copies of that laptop were provided to the New York Post. The New York Post took efforts to validate it, and there was a threefold effort. One, to talk to the repairman about how he came in its possession. Secondly, to look at other information on the laptop and see whether it contained information that could only be or likely be Hunter Biden's laptop. And third, cross-check it against other public information that they were aware of or knew. And all three came back with independent acts of confirmation that it was Hunter Biden's laptop, Hunter Biden's emails, Hunter Biden's text messages.
So first question. I mean, this is the first question I had. Why on earth does the repairman even think of going to Giuliani?
So 3 things happen. The first thing is, this is what happens when the key corrupt member of your family that's a key conduit for corruption is a crack addict. Things go AWOL. You can't trust them, unfortunately, to not do something incredibly incompetent. I think I got the French right.
Incompetent, close enough.
Okay, all right, yeah. You say it better. I'm trying to make it sound like incompetent. The French version of it just sounds so worse. It sounds so, that's terrible.
That was from a movie. You are what the French call les incompetents. I think it was Home Alone 1, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's a great reference. And our first cinematic reference comes from you. What happens is, that's problem 1. How it happened, problem 2 is the repairman gets nervous because Hunter never comes back for it. Now, the way repairmen operate is they want collateral for doing the work on your computer or anything else. So you sign a contract that says, hey, if I do all the work and fix your computer and you never come back, I'm like a pawn shop. I get to keep the computer and I get to resell it or do whatever I want with it. And that reaches area number 3 for folks out there. You'd have no expectation of privacy in anything you abandon. So this is why, for example, your garbage is the number one source of cops and private investigators going through it. So I've hired people to go through folks' garbage. People keep forgetting. They think, hey, if I throw something away, it's still mine, even though I'm putting it out to the public to be put into a public place somewhere. And that's why they don't shred things, which you should do before you put it in the garbage. Things like that, you'd be surprised at the things people leave in their garbage. So but they I mean, really telltale signs. Sometimes the notes of their bad activities, it's like a live show of Darwin Award winners for dumb criminals. But that's effectively what happened with Hunter Biden. So legally, the reason why he could look at it is both his contract and privacy law entitled him to do so once Hunter Biden never came back for it, and importantly, never paid for the work that was done. It would have been a different thing if he would have paid for the work but not come back for it. What happened?
And if I just stop you there now, Karen Stratton says apparently the laptop was sent to the FBI in fall, winter of last year, which is interesting and material. But so that was the first question I had. Is so we know the principles in law. If you do work on a car, the person doesn't pay, you can seize the car, or you don't have to give the car back until they pay, and you can use the car as some form of payment. When it came to a computer, I was sort of maybe thinking you could keep the computer, but you have to wipe the information because you don't have the right or access to the information on it. But if the idea is that you don't have a right to privacy in anything you abandon, that is fascinating.
Exactly. It's just like what you put in your garbage. Same thing, because I've run into this problem. I had a client who left his laptop at a pawn shop, never went back for it, ended up in the Fed's possession. It was a big problem. It turned out there were other issues. So so I've been through it. So I've been through the legal weeds on it, and that's why it is what it is. But that leads to the second component. The repairman started to get nervous because he recognized Hunter Biden in the news stories. And he started wondering whether maybe this guy deliberately left his laptop here. Maybe I'm sitting on criminal evidence and somebody's going to accuse me of somehow being in the middle of something. He just hit every panic button known to man. So he decided, okay, and this was a smart little repairman. He'd been around long enough, obviously. He does two things. One, he calls the FBI and says, I got this. Please take it off my hands. But he does a second thing. He backs it up. Because he's like, I don't trust, maybe the FBI will even be bad. This is big, powerful political people. I don't want to get on the wrong side of anybody. I'm going to have a little safety. I'm going to have a little insurance. I'm going to do a backup of the laptop. What is fascinating here is the FBI had this information for a year, and apparently, just like Clinton emails, just like Clinton Foundation, they tried to bury it again. They sat on it, pretended it didn't exist, didn't investigate it. They had it while the impeachment investigation was ongoing. It was clearly material evidence to the impeachment, and they failed to disclose it to anybody, failed to provide it to anybody. And what this kid did is he just waited a long time, and then it was towards the election season, and he realized the FBI was not going to do anything with it, and he made the smart play, which is, okay, Biden might win this election. I know things that other people don't know. I don't want to end up, remember, folks, Epstein didn't kill himself. Eternal truth number 2. Number 1, Sally Yates is corrupt. So he decided he didn't want to get Epstein somehow, or Clinton, or Arkansas, as they used to say in Arkansas, because a lot of people seem to drop dead. More people than dropped dead around the Kennedy assassination dropped dead around the Clintons. So the Clinton, the getting close to the Clintons is still a higher risk factor than getting close to someone with COVID, folks. So he was like, I'm now, part of this is speculation, but this is my guess as to what his motivations were. He thought, you know what? I don't want to get in the middle of something if Biden wins. These polls are saying Biden's going to win. I'm going to provide this publicly, so then it's no longer in my hands. Other people have the intel. Other people have the info. Whatever they do with it. But there's no incentive anymore to have me floating in a river in Delaware sometime.
So, and the amazing thing is, it's an interesting thought process as well. Is if you don't mirror the drive and you don't have some proof of authenticity of the way it was when you received it or had it, there's no telling who's going to blame the repairman for what magically appeared on that computer after the fact.
And it's already happening. Because as soon as the evidence came out, the high-ranking same members of the FBI that have been trying to cover up for the Bidens, just like they covered up for the Clintons, said, oh, this was Russian-planted propaganda. So they were already going there. And so he helped protect himself by having a copy. He released to third parties. He turned the originals over to the FBI without doing anything. He put it out so that that narrative would be difficult for them to prosecute. But clearly that's what they would have alleged if he didn't have a copy. They would have said, oh, no, that's fake. And this is okay. This came from the Russians and this guy's in the middle of it. I mean, look at what happened to Papadopoulos. He was just a little low-level guy, and all of a sudden he's looking at a couple of years in federal prison. He ended up doing a little bit of time, but still had his life ruined. Same thing to Carter Page, largely. Didn't have to do any time, but had his reputation completely crushed, and bye-bye any connections to Russia after he's disclosed as a source for the FBI and the CIA for a decade. So he made the kid clearly made the right decision. Young guy made the right play, understood how this works. I believe he lived in Delaware, which would make sense because that means he understood some context that most people don't, which is who Joe Biden really is and why Barack Obama really picked him. And it wasn't because of his blue collar appeal.
So, okay. So, I mean, so first legal question out of the way, abandoned property, no right to privacy. So once this computer's abandoned or seems to be abandoned, apparently the lawyers wanted it back afterwards, but a little too late. He can look and see, he can see what's on it. And once he sees what's on it, he gives it to the FBI a long time ago. FBI seems to do nothing. For whatever the reason, motivation doesn't matter. Later on, he gives Giuliani and Giuliani's lawyer a copy of the hard drive. Giuliani has now been making his turns on the media to promote what was on that computer. Now, what is the nature of the evidence? What is the evidence in quotes? What's on the computer that is relevant to anything other than what some are saying is a troubled kid?
So, I mean, there's that aspect, but everybody sort of mostly I saw that as verification that the emails were in fact Hunter Biden's emails, that there were the kind of photos and videos that only Hunter Biden would have on his laptop, that someone else wouldn't have on Hunter Biden's laptop. Frankly, some of the excuses I heard that this was Russian disinformation and whatnot, I was like, well, that would be worse because that would mean Russians had this private information about Hunter Biden's reckless habits and past and personal videos and whatnot. That wouldn't be a better situation. That would be what they accused. And this goes back to our original statement throughout how often projection is confession. And you look at what they accused Flynn of, you look at what they accused Trump of, it's often what they are giving you a roadmap to what they are guilty of. And like worry about blackmail, nobody's more blackmailable than the Biden family because of Hunter Biden and his behavior and other factors. But so the key things on there were emails and text, which confirmed information that showed two things. One, Joe Biden's culpable knowledge about what his family was up to. In terms of monetizing his office as vice president, especially for financial reward for the Biden family. And that included his brother, his sisters, his son, and others, and he himself. The second aspect was the degree to which he was personally involved. There's references to him as the big guy. There's references to meetings being set up with him directly, involving some of these dubious actors, all of which he had previously denied. Some of which and here's another irony, like if you wanted a true FARA case, a Foreign Agents Registration Act criminal case, what Hunter Biden and the Biden family was doing actually is a much more legit FARA case than what they brought against Paul Manafort or what they brought against people connected to Flynn. It tells you again, they're doing what they're accusing others of, and listen to what they accuse others of because they're almost always confessing. Reverse it, and you'll get a confession, and you'll know where to look. And somebody smart on that side of the aisle apparently did do that, though they mostly got fortunate. Now, the bigger backstory is Joe Biden comes from the old school Democratic political machine. So when Barack Obama got nominated and won, he did not come from a political machine. He had strong ties to what you could call the intelligence apparatus. There were connections to that as to people can research it. Won't go into great detail here, but there's a reason why he goes from a low-level student at Occidental College to a prestigious graduate of Columbia University with ties to very unique foundations and institutions in New York. All right. So if you track and trace some of those people, you'll find some other connections. But where he did not have connections was to the old school, two parts of the big political national Democratic political machine. One was just the Clinton political machine, which had built up very strongly. So he gives Hillary the State Department. promises her basically, I think, to become his successor, and turns a blind eye to the Clinton Foundation as long as they keep everything off the books. Hence, the emails not being kept in the regular course of governmental duty. And at the same time, but the other part of the big political machine is the old school political machine. I used to say that Barack Obama may have learned his ideas in Hawaii and Indonesia and Occidental College, but he learned his politics in Chicago. And in Chicago, you make sure you are bartering with the right political connections and the right political machines. Joe Biden had no historic appeal to working class whites in the Midwest. He only had one contested election in his life in 1970. After that, everyone was a breeze. Every time he tried to run for anything outside of that, he got crushed and humiliated twice, 1988 and again in 2008, both Iowa and New Hampshire. So, and again, as it turned out, 2020, both of those states. He's never had unique working class appeal. That was always a bogus narrative that the media pitched. What Hillary Clinton took care of the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton political machine, but Joe Biden took care of the old school political machine when the Irish used to run things on the Democratic machine side in big cities, especially going back to Tammany Hall. And that political machine, people can watch shows like The Wire. People can watch a great movie about how urban politics work by John Sayles. There's a range of it. You can read books like New Confessions of an Economic Hitman or The Original Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and the things like that. And it'll educate you on how the political process works at the grassroots level for Democratic political machines. If you're smart, you don't make the mistake Duncan Hunter made, the Republican congressman who was indicted and convicted in San Diego, who was using campaign funds for his personal benefit. You don't do that. You do like what Ilhan Omar has learned. And like I said, be like the Somalians to quickly pick up the corrupt aspects of American politics, just like it did in Project Veritas. You make sure your campaign funds don't go to you for personal benefit. They go to a friend or family member who then is just charitable and generous with you. The other legalized form of bribery is you get honorarium and speaking fees and consulting fees and board of director fees and book fees after you leave office.
It's actually something I just put up on Twitter yesterday, and I think you retweeted it. Who was it? It was, I'm going to forget the name of the guy who tweeted, this is how Joe Biden ended up with this $50 million mansion, whatever, $8 million in book sales. And I said, yeah, that's what you call bribery in advance. It's sort of like, here's $600,000 for a speaking gig for a job well done as president. It makes no sense that anybody's time is worth that much, especially after they leave office, unless, there's some implied, do it for us now and we'll line your pockets later. Actually, one legal question here about all of this. Did the computer repair guy have any legal obligation to report his findings? I don't know how this works. If you find something like, I'm not suggesting this was on Hunter Biden's laptop. If you find illegal content on a laptop doing a repair, do you have to report it to the FBI?
It all depends. It depends on the circumstances. It depends on your right to access that information. It turns on the right to authorized access to the information. So it's now, once it was abandoned property, there was risk. Because what happens, for example, let's say he found things that might be child pornography, right? Underage, minor sexual activity. Yeah. If that's on there, once it's abandoned, technically that's his. Technically he owns it. Technically he possesses it. That would create legal risk for him. And that's probably what, I'm not going to say that far because that hasn't been confirmed, but I'm saying that could be an explanation for why he went to the FBI.
Okay, so that's the interesting political backdrop. The legal questions, then, we now understand the accessing to the computer. He goes to the FBI. FBI does nothing, sits on it. I brought up a super chat that suggested, this was somewhat known within, which is why they rushed the impeachment to get to that before any of this could get out. The speculative stuff I'm less interested in, just because we can all have our own opinions. But the ramifications of what's on it potentially show that Joe did not know what his son was up to. If the text that was released the other day tends to show that it was actually Hunter who might have been supporting Big Joe through the gigs that they got hooked up, whatever. Okay, that's the political side. The legal side, once this story breaks and then Twitter, Facebook goes into full panic mode. And what I love is the narrative now is, we don't know that, this is Russia disinformation. They're altered. They might be altered, etc. Same exact pattern that goes on with Hillary Clinton's emails when Donna Brazile got caught up in this. So she says, I'm not confirming that these emails may or may not have been modified or altered. They never were altered. Then, apologizes for the truthfulness of them later on. Twitter goes in, and for everybody who doesn't know this, was not allowing people to share the link to the New York Post expose article breaking the story. Somebody from the New York Post, one of the journalists themselves said, I can't tweet a link to my own story or our own story because Twitter's blocking it. No explanation. They just block it. Facebook as well. Then they come out afterwards and say, we blocked it. The reason why we blocked it is because some of the images contained personal information and it violates some of our policies. They then come out and revise that a little later and say, no, it violates our policies on publishing hacked material, which I also said on Twitter sort of confirms the veracity of the documents. And now people are coming out and saying, it might be modified and altered, in which case it wouldn't have violated any hacked terms of service use. It would have just been, fake information. So they've gone through the gamut of excuses. But Robert, how does a social media platform justifiably, legally, or illegally, or is it illegal? How do they go about censoring that without consequence? I mean, people are asking, how do they do it? How do they do it?
Well, it's always helpful when the Ukraine advisor to Biden's campaign and to Joe Biden historically is now the director of fact checking for Facebook in that precise area. So that's where it starts. The second aspect of this is, how does a criminal case like this sort of bust open? The timing for that. The problem when you're trying to set up let's say you're trying to monetize Biden's power. And the excuse from Biden was always other people are doing it without his notice or knowledge. He's not culpable. Maybe his family members doing it, but he's not involved. That's what the emails and the texts refute and dispute. But the problem is usually you get in bed with other corrupt criminals. So the other backstory to all of this, and the reason why they were ready for something to fall and ready to suppress it and censor it and try to create a dissident story. I mean, they were quick with the dissident story, quick with censorship, quick with suppression. That usually means
it was the day of. Like, it was the day of. You couldn't share the link to the article, and it was mind blowing. It was mind blowing. Sorry,
it's because they were prepared. They knew this was coming, and the reason why they know this was coming is everybody's known this about Joe Biden for a long time. So to just give people a personal insight, when I was a criminal defense lawyer, people connected to Joe Biden were constantly pitching that for the right donations, they could set up a meeting. And Joe Biden was smart. Nothing in writing, always in cash. These were the terms, okay? And these were Joe Biden's allies. I couldn't directly pin Joe Biden for it, but these were people that knew him, were close to him, politically I lied to him. I refused to get involved, told my clients don't get anywhere near this with a 10-foot pole, didn't trust it at all. But what was being pitched was that for the right donations and the right meeting, maybe the criminal case of a client could go away. So that gives you an idea of how much was being monetized around him. And when Hunter was in debt and deeply involved with billion-dollar deals with Chinese government officials, multi-million-dollar deals with Ukrainian corrupt energy officials, multi-million-dollar deals from what they call in Russia the Moscow Mafia, which people don't know that there's a bunch of political groups that have power. Putin has very little direct power in certain ways. He just tries to keep the corrupt people in check. The Moscow regime is infamously corrupt. When something goes crazy in Russia, it's usually the Moscow regime. It has nothing to do with Putin. But the most corrupt actor in Russia is the wife of the widow of the Moscow mayor. You can look into how she became the widow. That's another story. But she had a completely unexplained massive money sent to Hunter Biden. He set up a consulting company, something generic like Rosemont Seneca. It sounded like the Wolf of Wall Street, Stratton Oakmont, which will actually come back into our Section 230 story, ironically enough.
Yeah. I took a picture of the super chat that I just brought up from Zippo because we're going to get into Section 230. So
exactly. So the issue is that anybody who's been around the Bidens and in the Biden political, as soon as he got power, his sister suddenly becomes a political consultant. Do you think she's really a skilled political consultant, folks? It's just ways to funnel money to the family. The brother is doing real estate deals in Iraq. Do you think he had a real estate connection? Research his history. Do you think Hunter Biden suddenly became an expert on Chinese data security or Ukrainian energy? Everybody knew what was going on. And the only question was, could they prove it was tied to Joe? And the reality was Joe was smart. Joe didn't put it in his calendar. It was a great thing. It was the Prince Andrew defense. I double checked. I didn't meet with Epstein that day. It wasn't written in my calendar. Yeah, right. The calendar defense. It's like the Stephen Glass defense for when he was fake.
I like the Prince Andrew. Was it Prince Andrew? The defense was, I recall at that period of time in my life, I was unable to sweat. That was one of the defenses that he gave.
He was
online.
never a party guy. He doesn't know where that comes from. Party, Prince Andrew. Oh. It's fascinating. The Stephen Glass was a famous fake journalist for the New Republic, was writing fake news stories. They actually portray a version of it in the show The Wire.
And another movie reference, Shattered Glass. Great movie.
Great movie. And what it is he said, look at my notes, because he made up his story in his notes. Journalists were so used to justifying what they reported by whatever nonsense they put in their notes that it became the source, as if that was somehow an independently verifiable source. And as lawyers, we can tell you your diary of events, very rarely admissible because it's, self-serving hearsay. So but that's the nature of it. Sometimes contemporaneous notes can be relevant in certain circumstances.
Now, Isaac Castillo asks, has Biden's camp come out and state that the laptop email info are patently false, or are they just pounding the table? They're just dead silent. They haven't said anything.
Correct. And his lawyers have asked for it back. So, by the way, folks, if you're going to pretend something is fake, don't ask for it back. Just work to the why. I've been through this scenario before. I'm like, I don't know where that came from. That's not my clients. Like I said, they found a laptop of my clients at a pawn shop. And I was like, that's somebody else's. Oh, who knows who borrowed it and took it? And you should look at that pawn shop owner. He's probably a freak. You have to come up with whatever defenses you can. But I'll tell you what I didn't do. I didn't ask for it back. That's what I did not do. So yes, I have no doubt that the texts and emails are valid. Everybody, put it this way: there was a reason Biden had his son right behind him when he went to China, coming off that plane. It was a message to everybody in China: you better start dealing with the kid, and to get what I want, to get my piece of the action. Because the big money for, if you're these days in American politics, this is what Confessions of the Economic Hitman are partially about, and there's documentaries on it too, is the monetization of foreign sources. This is why the Clinton Foundation was 90% foreign. The biggest places you can get bribed are foreign governments who are completely dependent on what the U.S. does for security, for criminal prosecutions, for military influence, for political control, you name it, particularly in Iraq and Ukraine and China and in parts of Russia. Not all of Russia. Putin basically has shut the door to U.S. influence at a national level, but you can still have influence at the local level, at the Moscow level, at oil companies doing business in Europe, oligarchs doing business in Cyprus and the United States, and other people. Olinikov had a lot of connections here in the United States. So that's who you shake down. And the Biden extended family has done an art form of it. And the money there's emails that are saying that Biden was going to be a secret 10% shareholder of a Chinese company. By the way, most of these people have been criminally prosecuted in their foreign countries. The people he was involved with in Ukraine now being criminally prosecuted. The people Hunter was involved with in China now being criminally prosecuted. Not only that, here's the other way this story backed out. The problem with dealing with when you have this sort of corrupt set of families, aside from one having a derelict kid who's such an addict, he's going to leave his laptop at some local repairman's shop. The other problem, and maybe not fully remember, the other problem is you're going to inevitably invite foreign or other corrupt actors around with you. So the other thing that blew up here is his main partner in all of these projects was a guy by the name of Devin Archer, along with John Kerry's stepson from the Heinz family fortune money, as in Heinz ketchup money. And they were the three partners with this project that was basically monetizing access to the vice president to all these corrupt foreign oligarchs around the world. And they just decided, hey, why stop there? Why not rip off some Indian tribes and some hedge funds here in America? So they're just, it's a problem with dumb, greedy people. Like I said, corruption, okay, dumb, okay, both together, not good. And it's the Judge Sullivan disease. So Archer basically got involved, tried to rip off an Indian tribe. They did a bond deal. Then they got control over a hedge fund that had money from an investment fund that had money from pension funds. And that was their problem. They scammed some big rich people in the process, got them to buy the bonds, actually pocketed most of the cash, didn't give it to the tribe. They all go back and read about the Abramoff scandal that implicates Ralph Reed even on the Republican side of the aisle. Long history of them ripping off tribes. I've represented a range of tribes in a range of matters, and it's a frequent problem. But again, the part of how that whole deal went down was they were selling their access to Joe Biden. Now, guess who steps into our story to make sure this criminal case stays cabined? Which district do you think steps in?
I'm going to say, if I have one guess, SDNY.
Even though they weren't in the SDNY, the tribe wasn't in SDNY, the people defrauded aren't in SDNY, but magically the Southern District of New York and Preet Bharara come to play. And they get the case somehow assigned to Dan Abrams' sister, who's the daughter of Floyd Abrams, whose husband is part of the Mueller special counsel team. So they secure convictions of these guys. Somehow Hunter Biden is the one who doesn't get touched. Purportedly had nothing to do with this somehow. And in fact, the judge, strangely, sets aside the verdict that happened in her own courtroom. But what happened first week of October? This is another reason for timing. First week of October, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals reversed what Judge Abrams did, reinstated the verdict, and it meant Devin Archer and his other comrades were going to prison soon. And apparently they were very unhappy about this fact. So and my guess is they probably went to Hunter beforehand and said, make sure your dad protects us and we'll keep our mouths shut. That didn't happen. My hunch about the timing of this is that they're talking to Peter Schweitzer and other people, confirming what's on emails, confirming what's on text, confirming the modus operandi. Peter Schweitzer both wrote a book about some of these issues, and there's a documentary on YouTube done by Blaze TV that people can look up about Biden and the Chinese secrets involving China in particular. Peter Schweitzer did Clinton Cash. He's also documented corruption on both sides of the political aisle over the past 20 years. Very good, independent, investigative, old school journalist. He does it with documents. He does it with evidence. He prepares it like I would prepare it or you would prepare it going into court. So there's definite evidence of extensive Biden corruption. And the question is, can they keep a seal on it better than they kept a seal on the Clinton emails and Clinton Cash scandal of 2016?
Okay. All right. And so that's getting back to the substance of what is going to come out, because I suspect we haven't seen the tip of the iceberg yet. But everyone's asking, how can these social media platforms censor with impunity? Which I guess in a way it brings us into the Section 230. The long lead up to that was they all knew it was coming. They were ready for this. And I guess, they knew where to block it and how to block it. They have the ability to suspend accounts left, right, and center, which they were doing. Anybody who shared the story. Actually, funny thing, which might explain why I forget which lawmaker it was who asked ACB during the hearing the whole 2-minute hypothetical question about a vice president's son, which I thought was inappropriate during the hearing, but it would be difficult to ban people for sharing that soundbite on Twitter without looking like you're censoring actual government information, which might make you liable. How do they do it with impunity? And at what point are they held to account, and on what basis could they be?
So two things there. Historically, big tech has been planning for this day for a long time, but especially since Trump's rise. So they met on an island outside South Carolina in February of 2016 to brainstorm how to do this. The agreement at that time was that Trump couldn't win the general election, so they weren't going to put their foot on the side either way, and so that nobody could accuse them of it. But they wanted to be in a position to do so, and they had been working with the Chinese government to how to leverage their monopolistic controls to suppress and censor information and to track people for a social credit score type system. This started getting leaked out by dissident members of Google, dissident members of Facebook, over the years. But they still planned on going this route. Now, for those further back, like when you're talking with Eric Hunley, who for folks out there does a great podcast, the Unstructured Podcast. You can follow it on YouTube. Did a great interview with Viva last week. He does great interviews with those behavior panel people. They're just
and he did a great interview with John McAfee, which
apparently, and I'll explain why John McAfee is assuredly innocent, but I'll explain that a little bit later.
No, we're getting there.
Exactly. But back to the true corruption of Section 2 of big tech and how Section 230 has been misused. So they put that in practical motion. Then going all the way back though to that question that was on the Eric Hunley, an Unstructured show. It is true that the internet was originally created by DARPA, the defense industry, in order to have secure communication. And then it became used for privatized purposes in the late 80s, early 90s. A great, I think it's Hold and Catch Fire or something like that. It's a great TV series that basically does a dramatic cinematic narration of the whole big tech revolution from 1985 through 2000. It even has basically a McAfee component, though it's a different character. It's basically that component. And it tells it well through these different stories and tells it really well. I think it's Hold and Catch Fire, something like that. I'll find the link and put it in the comments in the description below. So effectively, It went from the original assumption was that they were going to gather information, not censor and suppress, because the intelligence agencies didn't want them to do that. This was an exceptional means of tracking people. This is why like people are shocked that there's these huge voter files on them that predict what they're going to do. And they're like, that can't possibly be true. They don't realize that everything about your life has been digitized and monetized for some other company to have on you. You give me your name, I can basically pretty quickly figure out what newspapers you subscribe to, what you like on Facebook, what you comment on Twitter, what your voting history is, what your property holding history is, who lives at your home, what church you donate to, what school you go. I mean, you name it. I mean, just a wide range of activities that become pretty effective at some point of forecasting who you are. I know because I sort of tested this on a personal basis just to see how well they could advertise to me on Instagram by liking things I like. And it's like freaky how good they are. They like come up with stuff that I'm like, wow, that's fascinating. Wow, that's fascinating too. And I'm like, man, these guys are good at this. So that's how good the algorithm is. The Facebook joke is if you like 5 things, Facebook knows you as well as a distant relative. If you like 10 things, Facebook knows you as well as a friend. If you like 20 things on Facebook, Facebook knows you as well as a family member. And if you liked 50 things on Facebook, they know you better than your spouse does. That's the Facebook sort of mantra. The whole goal was the demonetization of your private information. Now, censorship doesn't fit into that. So the intelligence apparatus in the United States originally did not want the big tech involved in censorship. And when they passed the Communities Decency Act, Communications Decency Act in the mid-1990s, the Section 230 that was part of it, the whole goal was we want America to win the big tech race. So we're going to immunize you so that you can't get sued as long as you're acting in good faith and you're acting as a platform, not a publisher, so on and so forth. But it never anticipated, because the backstory that everybody on Congress and the Hill knew was that the goal was to gather massive information on people, which is useless if they're censoring, because then they're driving people underground. So they never thought that would happen. What changed was 2008, Obama wins. He wins heavily thanks to big tech. There's news stories about how big tech was working with his campaign secretly behind the scenes, because big tech has so much information on what people are thinking, what people are motivated by. Their algorithms are incredibly accurate at understanding what's likely to occur. They always thought it would work that way because it worked that way in 2012. Then all of a sudden Trump comes along. They think it's just an anomaly. When Trump wins, they're shocked. Soros is enraged. He starts shorting big tech stock, starts asking Congress to open up investigations to accuse them of enabling foreign interference. So they're getting pressure from that side. And they're getting pressure internally because their entire professional class of engineers and lawyers and staffers are all to the progressive social justice warrior left. It's the reason why Joe Rogan is currently having problems at Spotify. There's an internal revolution at Spotify against allowing the most popular podcaster in the world to have on who he wants to have on and broadcast what he wants to broadcast. So which means Spotify lied to the world, by the way. If they don't fix that, the big lawsuit's coming to Spotify because they made billions of dollars promising that they were going to have an uncensored Joe Rogan on. Well, and that's why their stock went up.
I suspect they will have inducement problems with Joe Rogan if he's not going there so that he can meet more censorship than he's leaving and presumably verify this information before moving. Okay, yeah, sorry, continue.
So that's the backstory to what's happened. The legal pretext was Section 230. Now, I was on Jordan Belfort's show last week. I think he's going to publish it, in the next week or two. For folks who don't know, that's the man that Leonardo DiCaprio played in the movie The Wolf of Wall Street. Fascinating guy, brilliant salesman. I mean, truly brilliant salesman. That guy could sell ice to an Eskimo, as the old saying goes. And as I explained to him, I have had good fortune in my life to represent a lot of innocent clients, and if I had represented him, he would have been innocent too. I forgot until he brought up. He said Section 230 is all about me, and I was like, "What?" And he was like, "Exactly." I had not put them together.
I've got to say, I'm ashamed. I might get haters. I've never seen The Wolf of Wall Street, but I know everything about it. I've read the synopsis. I've just never actually been able to sit down for 3 hours to watch the movie.
It's Scorsese, in my view, Scorsese's best movie. Basically, he's describing what he does brilliantly cinematically is describe how easy the trap and the destruction of depravity can be. that once you get into a certain lifestyle, it can slowly consume you. It's initially seductive, but ultimately destructive, which is actually Belfort's main theory and theme about his own life and his redemption story. I would have had more of his redemption story in the movie. That's the only difference. But because he's amazingly managed to do that. The fascinating guy, and just pure, he's like Scott Adams level persuasion analysis. So I recommend it for anybody to go to his sales school and whatnot. And he still has to give back money to the people. It was funny. He was sitting there telling me, he's like, yeah. So, and I realized then, so for folks who don't know, Stratton Oakmont sued Prodigy. And for those of us young, old enough to remember, I mean, that was big back then, AOL and all that jazz. In 1995, because on the boards, they were accusing Jordan Belfort, the Wolf of Wall Street, of being involved in fraud. And Belfort laughed. He said, I sued and had a great suit against him. He said, of course, what people were saying was actually true, but we had a defamation claim at the time. So so basically people were outing him. It went up to the Ninth Circuit, and the Ninth Circuit said Prodigy is not immune. I always knew it as the Prodigy suit. That's how I remembered. But then when he mentioned it, I was like, oh, yeah, Stratton Oakmont. So it was actually his company. A senator read the story about that and was so enraged that the senator demanded a change in the law so that guys like Jordan Belfort could not sue a company like Prodigy for what someone actually outed him for doing on board. So that's how Section 230 gets initiated. Now, what happens afterwards is that the courts interpret Section 230 to be a blanket immunity for big tech across the board.
And actually, just to put a pause in there, there were two. I forget the name of the other decision now. I'm going to forget. I think it was CompuServe, where there were two decisions which were sort of similar at the time. Prodigy, where Prodigy actually made an effort to moderate some of the content on their website, and because they didn't remove this defamatory article, notwithstanding the fact that they said they do moderate, they were held liable. This other one, CompuServe, said we don't make any attempts to moderate any of the content, and so whatever's on there is not our problem, none of our business. And they, under similar circumstances but not identical, were not found liable. And so, the idea was then that you're actually penalizing people who are trying to do the right thing and letting off the hook those who are not even making an attempt. And that was the underlying reason to say, under Section 230, if you try to create guidelines and try to bring off illegal content, you won't be held liable if you don't, if something slips through the cracks. And nor can you be held liable for attempting to enforce it and ensure that illegal content does not end up on the platform that you are offering. And at the time, I think it was illegal content, not offensive content, in the sense that anybody's using it now in YouTube. So that was part of the backdrop. Was Section 230 was an attempt to uniformize or make logical what a principle that didn't seem logical at the time was: if you make an attempt, you'll be held liable. If you don't make any attempt and you leave all the crap up, you won't be held liable.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and there were two back then. The idea was if you exercise editorial privileges in a First Amendment conforming manner. They didn't use that language, but if you look at the substantive provisions they're talking about, they're saying you make a good faith effort to moderate, to exclude, and they list a bunch of categories. They're describing things that are unprotected by the First Amendment: violent conduct. But they say extremely violent conduct, harassing conduct, stalking conduct, certain kinds of pornography, etc. And they provide for certain protections and take them out and put them in. But what happened is the courts interpreted it as, hey, Congress is telling us they want big tech protected for political reasons, economic reasons. So we're going to protect them across the board. And the way that expanded, first it started out a slow expansion. The second way was, I've been debating a bunch of big tech professors, purportedly professors, law professors, think tank people, for the last 5 years on this. And they always attack me and they say there's no such thing as a publisher platform distinction, What happened is Google and the rest bought up all the think tanks and many of the professors. What a lot of these law professors don't disclose is who is donating to their foundation at their law school, or donating, or that they're a private consultant for on the side. There was no money on the side of the people wanting to control big tech, tons of money on the side of big tech. So they bought off the reason, your reasons. The reason why Robbie Sove, I think it's Robbie Sove, the guy you're talking about, the reason why he's commenting on that, he works for Reason. Reason is heavily influenced by the Koch Foundation. The Kochs are on the big tech side, and that's why Reason, aside from pretending that Judge Barrett is going to be the great civil rights advocate on the Supreme Court, is pretending that is mad about this issue because they don't want big tech to be controlled or censored because they're in big tech's pocket. That's why the leading libertarian foundations are in big tech's pocket. Almost the entire law school, almost every lawyer or law professor that's blogging on this is in big tech's pocket. And that's why what the judges saw was, hey, all the legal academy and experts agree that Section 230 was really meant to just immunize everything. And so I came up with two lines of attack about 4 years ago. One line was to try the constitutional route, which was the old argument following a line of decisions from both California and the United States Supreme Court that said when a private company chooses to monopolize part of the public square, they're bound by the First Amendment. It became very clear that that line of suits had zero chance.
And it's interesting. I've been following this long enough to have seen that trajectory. PragerU didn't get away with it. Tulsi get away with it. It made no headway with PragerU. It made no headway with Tulsi Gabbard. And it became clear they're not going to accept that argument. They're private enterprises. They are not town square. They are not corporate cities. So it's not going to go anywhere. And it didn't go anywhere, right. Which is when, people have to go to second line of attack.
I still think it should, but that's different from the reality that it ain't. So I compare it to Indian treaties. They look good on paper, but good luck when the cavalry comes. So this is the reality of situation of that aspect of that argument. I think theoretically, conceptually, I still stand by my position because I think and for all those who are like, well, what about some little company that's now going to be thrown out of business because they have to regulate? No, this only would apply if you have monopoly power. You have to have at least 75 to 80%. That's the historical metric under antitrust laws of that market space. Google has that of its space, both YouTube and Google search. Facebook has that of its space. Twitter has that of its space. And my view is once you leverage that degree of power and what you're doing is the public square, you should be bound by the First Amendment. But folks, it ain't flying. It ain't going anywhere. It's dead. And it's especially dead after what Justice Thomas wrote, because what Justice Thomas made, he didn't go down that road at all. So that means that road is closed. Now, the second road I was trying to go down was to resuscitate common law theories of civil liability and say that just because you're big tech doesn't mean you shouldn't be held to the same standards of contracts and torts as every other mom and pop company in the world. So if you make a promise to somebody, you have to keep it. If you get unjustly enriched, you got to return it. If you are violating people's consumer principles or assumptions or expectations, you can be held liable under Consumer Practices Act laws. Unfortunately, that too has been shut off until what Justice Thomas wrote. And because I figured that would be the second path to solution, because all of these companies have lied to induce their monopoly power. I also think antitrust laws, I agree with Matt Stoller and others, need to be resuscitated against these companies because they've clearly leveraged their the argument in the various suits that are being brought against them now, the antitrust investigation they're under, state attorney generals, U.S. Department of Justice, are all very legitimate and justified because they've leveraged their antitrust power to increase their power over another sector of the economy, and that's what antitrust law prohibits. But putting that aside for the moment, the other claims should all be because they promise things. I mean, Twitter said we're going to be the free speech wing of the free speech party. They did so to induce people to monetize their information, their connections, their associations, which made Twitter rich, gave all of Twitter's money, came from that activity, and then turned around and broke the promise to be the free speech wing of the free speech party.
And you know what? I've got to mention it. Like, Jack comes out at the beginning of when this election cycle started and says, we're not taking any campaign ads or political ads on our platform. We're going to remain neutral and not. I think you remain neutral. And then some people were asking this question: is what they did not a contribution in kind to the campaign to censor negative material? It was sort of actually a tongue-in-cheek question, but is what they did cannot be considered to be anything tangible in terms of donation?
If you use the democratic standards, it is a violation. Now, my view is there's a lot of First Amendment restrictions on those campaign finance laws. So I'm not in favor of a broad interpretation of those laws because the probability they get interpreted in a way that favors ordinary people against the elite ain't high. So that's my view. I like when they said Donald Trump Jr. had a meeting and received information from a foreign source. I was like, it's like that's hogwash. That's all First Amendment protected activity. And I feel the same here, that it's probably First Amendment protected activity. Unless one exception, if you're explicitly coordinating with the campaign, then that's considered a campaign donation, and the value of what they did way exceeds what they can legally contribute.
Now,
that's why an FEC complaint would be valid.
Okay, then that's very interesting, because if there is not an FEC complaint yet, Congress is talking about congressional subpoenas, which might, assuming nobody's deleted emails because they haven't received a subpoena yet, might evidence coordination. We'll see. No point hypothesizing on that. But actually, sorry, we got off the topic. Justice Thomas releases that 10-page opinion. My first question in that. Oh, do you want to add something first?
No, go ahead.
Okay. My first question with Justice Thomas's opinion is how and why? Because we're sitting there watching Amy Coney Barrett all week talk about how I'm not giving opinions on hypotheticals unless there's a court file, a briefed file. We don't want to indicate how we're going to adjudicate on things. And then and then out of the blue, for no good reason, in denying a petition for writ of certiorari, Justice Thomas issues a 10-page advisory opinion, unsolicited opinion, nonetheless. So why did he do it? How did he do it? And was it wrong to do it in the first place?
So about 5 years ago or so, give or take, I and some other lawyers came up with this idea of these two paths attacks, and they mimicked my lawsuits in a range of cases across the country. And initially actually prevailed in a San Francisco trial court, and then Court of Appeals in California court stepped in very quickly and reversed. But it showed the possibilities, because what we did is we looked at every single theory of attack, which ones had any chance of success, and we found that some commercial attacks had worked, but not for ordinary consumers, and I was like, well, logically it would extend. So a lot of those cases, they have brought up to the Supreme Court, and the petitions were not granted, but it's one of the reasons why I tell people, whenever you have a chance to file something to the U.S. Supreme Court, do it. Doesn't matter if your chance is 1 in 1,000. So that's why I'll file 3 or 4 this year at least, have filed dozens over the years, even though it's expensive. It's like $5,000 just to print you have to print a little thing that's like 9 copies of it and a special leave it to the Supreme Court. Always have to print something special. Can't just do something normal. But it's worth it because they read all of those, and at least their clerks often read them. So if you keep hammering away at them, even if they don't take your case, you're going to start to see justices say, hold on a second. It's also why you argue in the court of public opinion. You keep hammering and hammering and hammering a thematic structure, so that because as Sullivan eminently reveals on the bad side of the aisle, judges pay a lot of attention to what's going on in the court of public opinion. So so that's why it's important to do so. It's also important sometimes to keep your mouth shut too. So it depends on the case. So that's why it was good. And I think Thomas had seen those, and he borrowed the second line. So he's like, first line's not going anywhere, making it constitutional, making him a quasi-government. That's just not working. It's not likely to work with my colleagues. Drop it. And what he's doing is, the reason why he issued it is he's giving a roadmap for everybody out there. He's saying, hey, the second road is viable. I, as a Supreme Court justice, think it's viable. You can now cite it to every court in the country, state court and federal court in the country. I'll be the only Supreme Court opinion on the subject at this point that says, here's why this logic and this path should actually reform what happened. Because his point is, this was never intended. There's been a big lie told by the legal academy that's in the pocket of big tech, that this was intended to be a blanket carte blanche immunity. No, it wasn't. These companies got rich by lying to their consumers, lying to them about what they were going to do. Nobody would have joined Facebook rather than MySpace if Facebook would have said, by the way, in the future, we will randomly censor your content. We will randomly manipulate your algorithm, and we'll monetize your private information, including your kids' private information, for our personal profit. Would people have gone to Facebook then instead? No, there would be no big Facebook. MySpace would have dominated. Twitter similarly would have lost. YouTube similarly would have lost. Google similarly would have lost. YouTube makes its money off of its contents, of its creators' content. YouTube does nothing but provide a platform for it. How many people would have joined YouTube rather than any of the other competitors 10 years ago if YouTube would have said, by the way, we'll randomly cut off your monetization, we'll randomly use the algorithms to drive down searches for your content, or maybe we'll just overnight destroy your accounts like we did last week to anybody who mentioned certain Biden information, or to a whole bunch of QAnon accounts. And I've been very public about not being a fan of QAnon theories and strategies. I am a harsh critic of any effort to censor them.
It's an amazing thing, actually, just to highlight the injustice. Even when they demonetize a video because the video itself is inappropriate, that content creator is still driving people to the platform, driving them to other videos, which themselves are monetized. It is patently a case of enrichment or unjust enrichment.
Absolutely.
So now
So what Thomas did is he laid out, and you did a good video on it. Thomas lays out, hey, by the way, this is a viable path. This Section 230 was never meant to be this broadly expanded. In fact, it's a contradictory reading of the statute. You can't read the whole statute and come up with the interpretation all these courts have come up with. And that this has been bad logic adopted by the lower courts. And I think we should, as a Supreme Court, make it clear. But what he's hoping is district courts pick up on it. Courts of appeals pick up on it. State courts pick up on it, so that it starts to breach the impregnable wall of Section 230, so that what I argued in court, and I picked a case where I had a Republican judge, a Republican jury. She still shut me down. I ended up getting a good settlement from Twitter just because Twitter didn't want me to appeal it all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, because I was making arguments they didn't realize the resonance of until even the judge recognized them. But the judge was like, hey, politically, there's too much power behind what what Justice Thomas did was change the power equation. All the power had been on the side of big tech, so that every judge who even thinked about challenging him was like, I can't find a single opinion that says you're right, Mr. Barnes. They all say you're wrong. Why am I going to be the one to buck them? Now I have Justice Thomas saying, the only Supreme Court justice to comment on it, saying I'm right. So that means that and there's been massive violation by of consumers' rights and content creators' rights, and maybe systematic and systemic election law violations, though that has limited legal remedy to the FEC. But the other two should be actionable. There has been massive unjust enrichment by all of them. They got rich by lying to people.
It's an amazing thing. People in Canada, we have the criteria for unjust enrichment, which is enrichment, correlative impoverishment, and an absence of any contractual reason for that to exist. In this case, it's beyond that. It's almost false inducements, like you say. Nobody would have gotten on YouTube, the free speech platform, put up your content so they can build their brand, build the entire platform. But if they don't like your stuff for political or ideological reasons, just demonetize it, shut you down, shut your account down. But the one thing is, Justice Thomas did not. There's nothing unethical about the opinion that he issued.
Oh, no, not at all. So justices do this all the time. So now Thomas actually has a longer history of doing it, though sporadically. I took a Fifth Amendment case to challenge the scope and scale of the meaning of the self-incrimination clause because Justice Thomas and Scalia had joined. And Scalia used to do this. Ginsburg on occasion would do it. Back in the old days, the great jurists like Black and Douglas would frequently do it. So it was just a way of sending a signal and sending a message. So you'll often see these quote-unquote concurring opinions. Remember, Roberts wrote a concurring opinion on the church case on the pandemic, giving a roadmap.
A concurring opinion with an existing opinion I can understand, but when they're just dismissing a petition for writ of certiorari or whatever, cert, they're saying we're not hearing it, but here's what I think on the non-substance of a case that doesn't exist before me. I was just wondering if it was not tantamount to giving an opinion on a non-existent hypothetical case. But
no, because it's the reason they used to actually publish more dissents and concurrences on cert petitions. So there used to be more explanation of why they didn't take a case but would take a future case, why they didn't take a case, things of that nature. So there used to be more of that. About 20 years ago, they started, like it used to be the protocol that Supreme Court justices had complete carte blanche over their circuit. So for those who don't know, each of the Supreme Court justices are assigned circuits. Now, there used to only be 9. Now there's more. So a justice will have more than one circuit. But they used to write their own opinions. They used to write their own bail decisions, which was fantastic back in the day. Now they have a custom and protocol that they refer it to the whole court, which I think is a wuss move. I think they should be writing independent decisions because they get to. And so injunctions, for example, would be decided by the single justice assigned that circuit. I think that's great. I think that's fantastic. I think that we would have more diversity of opinion. What is they didn't want a conflict, so consequently they agreed by consent to basically be lazy and have to make the whole court write one, and then all that did is reduce the number of opinions being written each year. But technically, what he did has no problem whatsoever. It's pretty once it's a live case in controversy when the petition for cert's been filed. Now, if he'd written an opinion about something when no petition for cert was filed, that would be problematic. Okay. But once it was a live case in front of him, so he could say anything he wanted, even though they were denying the cert.
And by and large, all he did was summarize the history, summarize the case law, and indicate. I mean, I guess indicate to some extent his interpretation of what the intent was versus how the courts are interpreting it. And obviously, the case they had before them was a very unique case because it relied on a separate section of Section 230, and immunity was denied in that case. So it's sort of really not the best case to set the example, but clearly was the road work or the roadmap for a future case and what they would have to argue to get up there and to make a point. Is it not? My question was, I think I know the way I feel in my answer. I'm curious to know your thoughts. Is what Twitter and Facebook did not election interference? And if it isn't, why isn't it? Is anybody going to do anything about it?
Two things with that. There's election interference as an objective empirical reality, and then there's election interference as some form of illegality. It's not probably election interference as some form of illegality unless there's been coordination and it's an in-kind campaign donation that's been undisclosed and in excess of the limits. I'm not a fan of trying to make a quote unquote election interference criminal, because at some point you start to criminalize speech. And so that's my concern with that. So to me, the key is factually. Now, as an objective matter, they're absolutely trying to impact the election. So it's a form of election interference. And to the degree that people describe or define intellectual interference as A, trying to influence an election, and B, doing so by deceptive means, this clearly fits that category. So it's empirically and objectively election interference. That's just not criminal for good reason, because of the First Amendment constitutional constraint that cabins the application of that law, unless it's deliberately coordinated and basically an in-kind donation that's undisclosed and in excess of the limits. Okay. Now, I do think that what they did is going to empower its critics. And I think it also, by the way, it tells me something politically, which I'll comment on in the more detail in the People's Pundit Daily Show each Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. But they would not have taken this gamble if they thought Trump was a lock to lose, because they knew doing this would blow up in their faces. They knew they would get massive criticism and massive blowback. And yet they did it anyway, which, by the way, tells you how true it is. Because if they really thought a detailed inquiry would show that these were bad journalistic methods that showed that there was no verity or validity to this, then they let it take its own path and say, oh, see, this is another crazy fake news story from the critics of Biden's critics. Instead, they were paranoid of anybody paying any attention to this, tried to suppress it and censored it, and considered it more risky for the truth of the story to be revealed than for the truth of their censorship to be known.
I mean, the censorship it made no sense. We're not idiots. It comes out without any explanation. The explanation is an ever moving target of personal information, hacked information, false information, all of which are basically mutually exclusive explanations. Okay, so I mean, I think we've covered that. I mean, it's interesting. So the 230 issues that Clarence Thomas raised now gives a sort of a roadmap to how people can attack 230, hopefully have the court set the right precedent, failing which it was Suave's criticism as well. By the way, is reason left or right for someone who doesn't know?
It's libertarian, and I call it the mouthpiece of the Koch brothers, but okay. That's my version of it.
So Suave's criticism was that this is just going to empower the wrong people regardless. And it's just
it's going to empower people like me. So we have our specific disagreements on this. And he's right, because I had sort of said, okay, for now, until there's been legislative reform, it's a waste of time to file suit. What Justice Thomas said, combined with what they did last week, says that, hey, maybe I'll get a judge to hear this particular kind of challenge. So I'll try to find the right fact pattern, right case to bring. And I will probably bring a case or two in the forthcoming future on this subject.
Okay. I mean, I don't think we're going to get into more detail on this for the time being. We'll see where Section 230 goes. Say it one more time, your proposal to remedy the deficiencies with Section 230. What could be the easy fix?
Let big tech be held to the same rules as every mom and pop company in the country. When they lie to people, they get held responsible. When they're unjustly enriched, they get held responsible. When they falsely induce people into contracts to create content for them and then screw them over, they get to be held responsible like any other business. So just hold them to the same rules as everybody else.
Excellent. What do we talk? Before we get into the next topic, I just want to read 3 super chats that I think I may have missed. Andrew Torba, I'm gonna be ignorant. Someone said we should do a stream. I'm gonna have to, educate myself as to who you are. The reason why Trump won't trust big tech is because big tech stocks are a huge percentage of the stock portfolio. Trust busts big tech monopolies. Stock market be damned. Also, get gab.com. Craig Lino 504 says, "Is Congress totally bought by big tech? What laws can be passed to stop big tech from censorship?" So we got that as well.
They just make clear what Justice Thomas said about Section 230, allow them to be sued. And my additional component is to say that Section 230 is conditioned on them applying First Amendment standards and how they govern their platforms, so that if they want the carrot of any kind of immunity, they have to provide the stick of enforcing First Amendment standards on their platform.
Okay, excellent. What do we move on to now? Do we want to
election litigation was the next hot topic?
Okay, let's do it. What's the update now? What is the latest breakingest status of these lawsuits that are going to come to a head within the next 2.5 weeks?
So because so many of the key reforms were not passed by legislatures outside of Nevada, and because Justice Kavanaugh wrote that decision in the South Carolina case that we discussed last week, where he said that judicially engrafted election rules are likely to be struck down. They have to be passed by the legislative branch if we're going to recognize and respect them. Then there's been a litany of good decisions. So in Arizona, courts had extended the registration deadline because Democrats got whipped a lot in voter registration. At least that's one hypothesis of why the judge did what he did. Plus, most critically, a federal judge had issued an opinion that said you could sign your ballot 5 days after Election Day. In other words, so that just encouraged a bunch of unsigned ballots to go in and then to find the voter who forgot to sign the ballot and come in 5 days after Election Day to pad the ballot box. Both of those rules struck down by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. So now you have to get your ballot in by Election Day in Arizona, and voter registration's already over and finished. In Wisconsin, another court had extended the deadline for submission of ballots. A Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, based on Justice Kavanaugh's decision, invalidated that and said, no, all ballots have to be reported by Election Day. In Michigan,
these are all state. I mean, obviously, these are all state decisions. And now I'm remembering what you said before, because all of the election is run on a state-by-state basis. So what precedent does one of these state decisions set for another state? Anything or nothing?
The big one really was Kavanaugh. Once Kavanaugh said, if the source of the election rule is a judicially engrafted source, then that election rule is likely to be struck down as unconstitutional. If, on the other hand, it's a legislatively sourced, then it's likely to be upheld regardless of what it means. And so because so many of these rules were judicially engrafted, in Wisconsin, it was a judge who did it. So now you have to get your ballots in by Election Day in Wisconsin. In Michigan, it was the State Court of Appeals following the Michigan Supreme Court, which had twice reminded the dear governor, Governor Whitmore of Pennsylvania, of Michigan, that no, she can't just continue to issue edicts like she's a royal queen. Well, the Court of Appeals said the same thing about the election ballots. They have to be now in by Election Day. Then in Minnesota, same rules. It has to be in by Election Day. Iowa has to be in by Election Day. So that leaves 2 main cases or states up for grabs. South Carolina, the witnessing requirement is still there. And Virginia, witnessing requirement was relaxed, but still present. And that's the Pennsylvania decision pending before the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Nevada decision up at the Ninth Circuit. Based on what Judge Kavanaugh ruled, the Nevada's crazy rules are going to happen, because that was actually passed, though in a rushed form, by the state legislature and signed by the governor, because you have Democratic control top to bottom. So in Nevada, your ballots can be 14 days later. Everybody's getting ballots. It's supposed to be only active registered voters. I'm getting multiple ballots at my location in Las Vegas by someone that clearly hasn't lived here in over 5 years. So I guess that's 6 years ago, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, somebody was an active ballot. People are reporting as many as 18 to 20 ballots being received at their home. So Nevada is going to be a disaster. California is going to be a disaster. It too was passed legislation.
Now, disaster in the sense California, I don't think is Trump not relying on it for the electoral college, right? So it doesn't really matter in that sense.
It'll only matter popular vote. It'll matter with some House races. So California, New York, and Illinois all have contested House races. And for people making bets on turnout, making bets on popular vote, it will have an influence there. I think you're going to see some interesting turnout in those states.
Is there any chance on God's green earth California goes Republican, or is it a write-off, for the rest of political history? Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
Nevada.
That's the chance.
Okay.
0.
No, how many electoral college votes is Nevada?
7. 7.
So it's not that also, as big of a mess as it is, it's the exposure is sort of minimal in the sense that it's not a winner. It's not a make or break state for electoral college.
Correct. Exactly. I mean, what it was is Trump could have had a path without winning any Midwestern state if he added New Hampshire and Nevada, or Maine and Nevada. So it was one of those outside paths. His campaign is spending a lot of time and money here. I think it's a waste at this point. I mean, I told him that from the get-go once the law went through. But I'm still of that inclination. So it's because I don't think now upside. I do think Pennsylvania's law is going to be struck down by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court should make a decision this week, because what happened in Pennsylvania is it was entirely judicially created. And listen to what they did in Pennsylvania. Not only can your ballot come in 3, 4, 5 days, I forget whether it's 3 or 5 days after Election Day, it doesn't even have to be postmarked on Election Day. The rule is, under Pennsylvania's Supreme Court, which is a democratically controlled Supreme Court, which also completely redistricted all the congressional districts before 2018 to help give Democrats a huge edge in the redistricting there. They came in and they said a ballot has to be presumed to have been postmarked prior to Election Day, even if it has no postmark or if the postmark is afterwards, unless you prove that ballot was not mailed by Election Day, which is almost impossible when the postmark is an irrelevant piece of evidence. So now all of that was judicially created. Pennsylvania Republican legislature, they didn't pass those rules. So that's why I think the U.S. Supreme Court is going to overturn it. My argument that all ballots should be by Election Day because the federal statute says that, and that's what most of Trump's legal analysis was from his team, is likely not going to be followed because Kavanaugh didn't talk about it at all in that decision where they concurred. But because Pennsylvania is all judicially engrafted anyway, I think it's going to be reversed, and I think Pennsylvania is going to have ballots reported by Election Day. Because, by the way, I won't go into great detail here, but there's a lot of misanalysis of the early vote. A bunch of Republicans are not voting early in Pennsylvania because they think Democrats are going to steal the election. So they're waiting until Election Day because they're trying to make it as hard as possible. If they if they can't report ballots after Election Day, that strategy will benefit Republicans to wait until Election Day. And I think that's what the Supreme Court's going to rule. I think it's going to say this is a judicial, but it's a crazy thing what the Pennsylvania Supreme Court did. It basically gave Philadelphia 5 more days to find ballots after Election Day.
Okay, that's fascinating. And when you say you're going to talk about it later, you mean People's Pundit Mondays at 2:00 on YouTube?
Yes. I'll get into a little bit more of the terrible early voting analysis that people are doing out there on both sides. A bunch of young Republican data nerds are out there trying to read tea leaves about early voting. They don't understand what they're doing. So there is an art form to it. It's mostly very secondary data to interpret. But what people don't realize is a whole bunch of people are voting because of how they're reading the legal environment. So in North Carolina, there's a bunch of Republicans that don't want to vote early because they think Democrats will stuff the ballot box or find voters, maybe legitimately, but a lot of them don't think of it that way. So whether you agree or disagree with Republicans' interpretation of Democratic fraud, it's indisputably influencing the election because a lot of them believe it, and it's because they've seen odd things. If you live in North Carolina or Pennsylvania, you've had multiple state or federal indictments over the past 3 years related to voter fraud, stuffing the ballot box, bogus absentee ballots, bogus mail-in ballots, ballots going missing. So this is the Supreme Court's decision will make a huge impact on what voters actually do.
Amazing. And that is in theory, it's not just supposed to, it's going to come down this week.
Yes. I think so. People thought it would actually come down this past week. It's just because we're on the eve of it, and it'd be at some point, it's kind of unfair to Pennsylvania voters for them not to know when their ballot will count. Yeah. So that's why I think they'll, at least by the next week. I mean, by the latest.
All right, and I'm reading this. American Sun says, please tell Robert that I spent 6 hours watching People's Pundit, and I still don't know what Robert's predictions are for Trump, the Senate, and the House. Follow Robert on Twitter as well. It's Barnes_law. You'll know, because I know what Robert thinks. And
for all the specific predictions, you got to watch the show.
But do follow him on Twitter, because I read your Twitter now like the way you explain it, like not a train of consciousness, but rather a bookmark, a diary, to see what you want to remember.
An internal curational feed of ideas that I find interesting.
You'll see, because Robert gives certain people a hard time and really pulls out the stuff that indicates what he thinks. But People's Pundit. Okay, what was the other one? What was the other one we should probably do? Unless there's any more on the election updates.
I think those are the three big ones, and then we had a sequence of smaller ones along with the super chats and questions. So we have McAfee, we have Rittenhouse, we have the Denver shooting. We have any one of those.
Be real quick, because it may not be quick, but I know that you're going to have, call it a contrarian, but I know that you think he's innocent, or that he. Yes. I know you're going to have problems with the indictment. For anybody who doesn't know, John McAfee, founder of McAfee Antivirus, made millions off of that, sold it, has led an eclectic lifestyle. And eclectic is not the word, eccentric lifestyle. He became big in cryptocurrencies, has been on the run, living on an ocean quite literally, ran as a libertarian candidate for president in 2016 and ran again in 2020, but I forget now for which one.
Same one.
So he ran twice. He declares openly that he'll never pay taxes again, has not filed tax returns for year over year for 6 years in the United States, recently indicted, arrested in Spain, and is awaiting extradition. Now, I did a video breaking down the indictment. It's pretty straightforward. It says he failed to file tax returns for 2014 to 2018, that he evaded taxes in that he bought real property, vehicles in the name of a nominee, put money in a bank account in the name of a nominee for his own benefit, and therefore committed tax evasion. One thing McAfee said in his interview with Eric Hunley, it was one of the things that I ended my video with, was, how can they accuse me of evasion? I didn't file taxes and I didn't lie. So, you know the situation. What do you think?
I think he has a very vibrant defense, and here's why. Part of it, that picture behind me is a little reminder as to why. So part one is what's unique in criminal tax is that you have two defenses available to you that you do not have in any other area of law. Typically, if you're pulled over by a cop in a car and you said, well, I was going 90 because my lawyer told me last week I can go 90 on Tuesdays. That's not a defense to the traffic ticket. It is a defense to a criminal tax charge. It's called the reliance defense. If you had the advice of any tax professional that told you what you were doing was legal, then that is a complete defense to a criminal charge. The second defense is called the good faith defense. The good faith defense is, even if you believe something objectively unreasonable to believe, you are completely innocent of a tax crime if you sincerely, subjectively believe it to be true, that your conduct complied with the tax laws. As McAfee describes, he says, here's my understanding based on the advice I've received, that as long as I don't file, I can't be charged with a tax crime. That as long as I'm not lying to the IRS, I can't be charged with a tax crime. And I'm being public and open and transparent, that I'm not filing returns and not paying tax, and making it clear why and how. So as long as, now there's certain defenses you don't have. You can't say, I'm not going to pay taxes because I don't like the way tax money is used. That can't be your only basis. It can be part of it, but it can't be your only basis. You can't say that I believe the tax laws are unconstitutional and thereby I'm not paying tax. That cannot be your only basis. It can be part of it, but it can't be your only basis. You have to believe that the tax laws themselves allow you to do what you are doing in terms of your tax conduct. So now going to the specifics. And loosely, that's part of willfulness. Basically, it's not considered criminal willfulness, and all of the misdemeanors of not filing returns, the evasion charges, obstruction charges, all of those charges, filing a false return, in the tax require willfulness. They have to prove that, and that means that you subjectively have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you did not have any reliance upon any tax advisor, and you did not have any good faith belief that your conduct complied with the tax laws. So that's the core of McAfee's defense. Now, in particular, I have problems with the evasion charge, because evasion is supposed to be a species of obstruction. So what it's really supposed to be there for is somebody whose conduct deceives the IRS into not knowing they owe taxes. When you are broadcasting to the entire universe that you're not filing returns and not paying tax, how in the world is whatever else you do anyway deceiving the IRS? So people use nominees all the time for real estate transfers, especially someone as famous as he is. He also might have another explanation. There are lots of potential creditor claims against him independent of the tax arena, so it would not be to his advantage to put anything in his own name.
And actually, just on that point, and to address a few of the comments I brought up, he apparently is a very heavily indebted judgment creditor, by his own admission, in the order of $200 million as a result of 37 lawsuits that he never filed appearances and got judgment by default against him, one of which was an action in damages by his neighbor in Belize, who he is suspected, although not formally charged or even charged at all, to have murdered. And I mentioned that in the video. I'm not getting into that because apparently the backstory is that the neighbor poisoned one of his 2 German shepherds. He flew into a rage, paid a local hitman to do that. There's a lot of, when I'm saying eccentric, I'm not talking about criminality. I'm talking about the lifestyle that he's been living. But there is that issue. He's apparently got $200 million in judgment against him, and which might be why he doesn't own anything in his own personal name. One question that somebody asked in the comment section of my video was, if he's putting things in the name of a nominee, why would that be evasion for him as opposed to a taxable income for the nominee?
Oh, I mean, it depends on the circumstance. So one, the question is, was that action, putting something in the name of a nominee, meant to deceive the IRS as to whether or not he was paying taxes? And in my view, that can't be the case, because he was telling the IRS and the whole world for years he wasn't paying tax. So I don't see that as an obstruction species type charge. He wasn't evading them. He was simply using common protocol and policy, because, again, if his goal was evasion, he doesn't tell them, by the way, I'm making money and not filing returns and not paying tax. That could not have been his objective, given that other course of conduct. The other explanations for it could be a belief that the nominee would pay tax on it, because under certain circumstances, the nominee may have to. It also may have been, this number one. Number two, it may have been for totally independent, separate purposes of privacy, which has been a public obsession of his. It's reason he created the antivirus software all the way back. And he's huge into cryptocurrencies and all the rest. And third, it may have been to not deal with potential creditors that he had in private space. There's a U.S. Supreme Court that dealt with this. A person was engaging in secretive behavior, using nominees and other activity, because he was engaged in illegal gambling. And the U.S. Supreme Court said that that defense had to be considered, and as a matter of law, he could not be found guilty of a tax crime because he had an independent, non-tax reason for his private conduct. Not every form of private conduct that makes the IRS's job harder is a crime, even though the IRS would like to make it so.
Well, first of all, actually, McAfee is big on privacy. It was the one job I had to do in my video. I typoed his quote, which was that there's no greater spy in the world than your cell phone, or that your cell phone is the greatest spy on the planet. And I spelled plant. So there could be good excuses for why he's receiving things or passing them through a nominee. That much I understand. The defense, it's a curious one to say. I'm publicly announcing I'm not going to pay taxes. Seems like it might be the best argument for the fact that it is evasion. I'm not paying taxes. You're never going to find out what I make, and you'll never be able to come after me, which is effectively what he was saying.
But to me, that's basically putting a huge target on his chest. So someone whose real goal was to deceive the real goal of evasion charges is somebody who tricks the IRS into not trying to audit them, not trying to collect tax from them, not even knowing they have it. McAfee was drawing a huge target right around here, saying, "Look at me. I'm making money and not paying tax. I look at me. I'm making money and I'm not filing returns." Once he did that, that should have been an audit case. That should not have been a criminal case, in my view. The point of the obstruction laws was when somebody is so successful at tricking the IRS into not knowing to audit them, into not knowing that to even look at them. And that's what our criminal laws should be reserved for. Someone who lies on a return. Is who it really was designed for. There's a case called United States v. Spees that established that said, hey, no, you need an affirmative act of evasion. And it goes back to our obstruction cases we were talking about last week. It's the same. There needs to be a nexus. There needs to be, this act is meant so that you, the IRS, are tricked into not knowing to look at me. When you're writing letters or basically broadcasting to the entire world, look at me, I'm not filing returns and not paying tax. That's not who our criminal laws were meant to target.
It's interesting. I mean, my argument or my query would be whether or not making that announcement and then funneling everything through a nominee is not admitting you're going to commit the crime and then performing the evasion aspect of it. But
you're surmising. I mean, that's what the prosecutor's going to say. Absolutely.
Okay, it's interesting. No, but and then he's going to get extradited, right? Like I don't know how he ends up in a country that has an extradition treaty with the states if he's doing what he thinks he's doing, unless he wants to come back for whatever the reason, maybe to avoid other issues in other countries that might want to extradite him as well. But
to my knowledge, Spain's extradition allows for extradition for tax. There are a bunch of countries that did not, but Spain is one of them.
Oh, you know what? Okay, and I think we've gotten we're good with McAfee. I don't think there's much more to it for the time being.
Yeah.
Okay, now this is Bam Myers, who is the individual who was locked up in Maryland for the bonfire, and I read up on the case. I said it's probably for the same reasons why I say it's not good to do live streams on pending issues, because there still might be some issues pending in this. Bam Myers was the tattoo artist who was locked up for 27 days for having a second bonfire, despite the first warning not to have one after the COVID restrictions were put in by the governor. And so, I mean, there's really, as far as the standalone story goes, that's the story. He was warned on the first night. He had 40 some odd people, from what I know, because there's always more details to stories. Got a warning, had another bonfire shortly thereafter, and was put in jail stayed there for 27 days. From what I understand, ended up pleading guilty to get out. Robert, I mean, you saw the details of the story, but I mean, I guess the nuance to this is that there's a backdrop to this that makes this case not the most sympathetic case to the public from a PR perspective, in terms of who the government is picking on to make an example of for these laws, because you can read, the articles are out there. The BAM has a criminal history of sorts, which makes it very easy for the government to pick on him, in that it doesn't make for the most sympathetic case, like taking Shelley Luther as another example, the woman who was jailed for being in contempt of court. But on the substance of the law, Robert, I mean, what's your take, and what do you think of it?
I mean, I find what happened to him deeply problematic. I mean, this is like something out of a dystopian novel. That if you would have told me 2 years ago that we're going to have people locked up in jail for holding a bonfire in their backyard or anywhere else, I would say that's insane. And yet that's what's happening in America today. So I have deep problems with what happened to him. The question is, which are the best cases to take, and what are the best means of attack? And in that respect, I mean, I'll have more formal and full announcements later on, but I'm working together with a very high-profile individual to help coordinate attacks on this. That's on the opposite political side as me, and has a very famous name. So that will be announced in the near future, because we need to have left-right alliance with people that have public attention capability on both sides politically to end the line of exceptions that stem from Jacobson, the Jacobson disease that infects our jurisprudence that led to Buck and Korematsu. And I think it's coming down to, I mean, there's some current challenges to some of these initial forced vaccines that are happening, and forced medical testing and invasion of medical privacy. I'm looking at the ADA claims related to that we'll be bringing over the next couple of weeks. The goal has been to filter through all the claims and figure out what's our best legal roadmap of attack, coordinate with other of the best lawyers in the country on this field, some people that are really good politically. In fact, it's someone that whose father I was a deep admirer of. So it's going to be, but more formal announcements coming. We are going to find a way to fight back on the legal terrain. I'm not optimistic about the fact that I think Barrett will be on the Supreme Court. I hope it doesn't mean what I fear it means, but either way, we're going to try to find a way to attack to at least get some limits on the scope and scale of this, so it cannot happen in the future, and they can't go to the direction they're planning on.
Yeah. All right. And then all let's say is like it is objectively outrageous that people should be going to jail in Bam Meyer's situation. It's a big property. It was people having a bonfire, and there's, other circumstances that you realize, and you see what happens when you live in a world where they will pick someone to make an example of them, and there will be outrage depending on the circumstances, or people will say, oh, the authorities had an eye on one person in particular and set to make an example out of that person. And it's not going to elicit the same public outrage that it might have if it's somebody else who the authorities know very well not to pick on, because it'll just make for a massive backlash. But it
always ticks me off. I mean, tell other lawyers, I was like, the one thing I wouldn't do is make me angry. Is like I figured out why guys like Reggie Miller did it in basketball and whatnot. Whatever it was, when I get enraged, I become extremely well focused and very, very skilled at what I do. So when I see them picking on people they're easy to pick on, it tends to motivate me.
Yeah, no. It's Owen Jones says Bam Myers is a legend at my work. I work in MD. We still talk about him when any lockdown stuff comes up. Bonfire guy, we call him. It is, and it also highlights another issue, is that there's almost like two sets of standards where you never ever let someone forget about their criminal past for whatever the reason, and it almost makes for, like, say, double victimization in the sense where
it's always easy to pick on the outsider. It's always been, and it's just a different scarlet letter stuck on a guy's head. And so it always makes me mad. So I tend to take those cases disproportionately, sometimes not always the wisest monetary decision, but when I get agitated, I get agitated. So it can be useful at times.
Well, if nobody knows the story, just Google it. It's Bam Myers, bonfire guy, and you'll see the story. You may not believe it, and you may try to find other ways to rationalize what happened to him, and there may be other ways to explain it. I have no doubt he was on somebody's radar, and they said, we need to make an example to shut everybody else up, and this is a perfect example. And that's that's my sort of overview of my assessment. But the situation as it is just these laws, which were were nonsensical to begin with, enforced with an iron hammer, iron fist, whatever. Crazy story. Joshua Cornelius says, what does Barnes think about China preparing to invade Taiwan and how it relates to American chaos? They
won't actually pull the trigger on that. So they always like to threaten that. North Korea is their little pit bull on the world, because North Korea collapses tomorrow without China support. So they'll threaten that as their counterbalance. And Trump has sort of figured that out. And that's why he started to escalate and realized that they'll never return the escalation because they can't afford to. So the Chinese are putting massive backing behind Biden. That they're hoping and praying that Biden beats Trump because they already have guaranteed. Just go back. Like I said, that's where I recommend the Peter Schweitzer YouTube video that the Blaze put together. Just put in, the Blaze, Biden, China. It should come up. It goes into just Biden's own statements he's made repeatedly about China's not an enemy, China's an ally. It's great if China does well. There's a reason why that and the Hunter Biden activity were taking place. They have no doubts that if he wins, they can do whatever they want.
All right, now I know the one that people want to know updates on Rittenhouse. Are there any meaningful updates?
So the only meaningful update is the complete debacle that continues to be that case and its public handling. John Pierce had the mother appear, and there are people that I won't get into. I have several high-profile cases currently. People wonder why certain things aren't happening. There's a method to the madness, or what may appear that way. One thing you're very careful to do before, she's a working class mom. there are certain questions she couldn't answer without it either making her look bad or her son look bad. You don't do that kind of interview unless it's much more controlled. You have a very sympathetic audience, and Judge, I forget her last name momentarily, from Fox. And so, and they just put her on with no limits on questioning, with answers that are problematic for her or her son, that put her in harm's way. And with the guy looking like he's totally dozed out of his mind, John Pierce, then saying at the end, "Don't worry, the kid's coming home soon," even though there's no reason to believe that's going to happen or they're going to secure it. So it was a disaster in what was done. Totally. It's a classic example of how not to handle a case in the court of public opinion. So unfortunately, that's the only update. More disaster.
Yeah, I mean, I watched it also. It doesn't. It's the reason why I don't do it
I'm
on the.
I'm laughing at the chat.
Yes, I had to bring it up. No, it made no sense. There was nothing to be gained from having that interview take place, and only things to be lost. I mean, you want to try to garner public sympathy. I appreciate that, but the exposure was just greater than the potential reward. Okay, so we're going to see what happens with that, and then we have
the Denver shooting.
This is an interesting one in terms of secondary legal questions. Everybody knows the bottom line overview of the case is an unlicensed security guard working to protect 9 News at a protest. Trump supporter, or I think the person was a Trump supporter, had bear mace on them for whatever the reason. An altercation ensues, and what happens when you have an armed person with an armed person, different arms, and one arm prevails? The unlicensed security guard pulls the gun, shoots the guy, end of story. Now, so the question is, he's been charged with second-degree murder. So for anybody who doesn't know, I mean, just explain the difference as to what goes into the difference between a first-degree and a second-degree murder charge.
I don't know why he wasn't charged with first-degree homicide, because unlike the Rittenhouse case, there did not appear to me a self-defense under Colorado law. So Colorado's self-defense law is more limited than Wisconsin's is. So Colorado's self-defense law requires that you have proportionate response and it be the only remedy. So whereas Wisconsin doesn't have to have that. With Wisconsin law, if you fear imminent harm, you can use grave bodily harm to the other side. You can't in Colorado. So this guy has someone, he slaps at him, then he backs away, then he uses bear mace, and he just pulls out his gun and in cold blood goes boom. That is not a self-defense under Colorado law. So I don't understand why he wasn't charged with first-degree homicide. So I don't think he has a self-defense available to him. It's interesting to watch the left somehow claim Rittenhouse did not act in self-defense, but this guy did. I understand the political nature of that. I mean, we sort of see it on the right in the Breonna Taylor case, in my view, people's unwillingness to be skeptical of what the police did in the Breonna Taylor case because they're so accustomed to BLM lies about what police conduct is. And they had some choice comments for me last week, but I responded to most of them. Most of them were in good faith. A few were not so much, but that's okay. By the way, you're on mute, Viva.
Is the distinction between first and second degree not premeditation, or whether or not there's a defensible excuse for the conduct?
In most states, the difference between First and Second Amendment will be intentional versus reckless. So usually Second Amendment is where you cause someone's death but didn't intend it. But I don't know how you put it that way when a guy pulls a gun and shoots right at his chest. That's about as much intentional as you could get. You could see, like in a Breonna Taylor case, a reckless homicide charge where you're not even intending to hit her. If you believe that they were reckless in they lacked self-defense because they were reckless. That's how Kentucky law worked. And I'm not saying that's the case. I'm just saying that the grand jury wasn't given a fair opportunity to make that assessment on their own. But in this case, I don't see how he has a self-defense. Now, by the way, 9 News can be sued civilly. Now it gets tricky because the scope of employment, if his actions are intentional, often the scope of employment doesn't apply, and so they get off the hook. Or the insurance company has indemnification limitation that says we won't pay for any incident if it was intentional. So that's where the nature of the charge may change whether or not 9 News can be on the hook for any wrongful death suit, and whether any insurance is available to pay any judgment in the case.
And so I think that principle is vicarious liability of the employer for their employees. How does that work if it's a contractor?
Still often in the same plot because it's a parent authority. So it's if you are operating within the scope of employment or others believe you have the apparent authority to do so, then it doesn't matter whether you're W-2 or 1099. Independent contractor employee is really often only an issue for tax. It's rarely impacts your vicarious liability, because vicarious liability is all about either ostensible authority or actual authority to be acting on your behest or behalf. And particularly if you gave them the tools and provided the opportunity for them to be there, if they would not have been there otherwise. So, but it can all, anytime you have an intentional tort committed, it can get tricky. So that's where an intentional assault's committed by someone that works for the government. They're often let off, the government's often let off the hook, and you, the victim, can't get any relief because of the way they've, in my view, misinterpreted sovereign immunity in that context. The same kind of application can apply to employers, though usually employers are given less immunity than the government is in comparable contexts.
Okay, I mean, so it's going to the two issues are going to be whether or not it's any form of valid self-defense. This was in Denver, Colorado. So is there a stand your ground principle in Colorado, or
not really?
If the guy's bear mace, even if he has bear mace and you have a gun, you have a duty to retreat.
Pretty much, because it's required that it be the only remedy and that it be proportionate. That's the big problem. So it's going to be hard to argue that in response to bear mace, I had to shoot him in the head or shoot him in the chest.
Yeah, no, I think it was in the face. I just brought up the chat. It's no, I mean it's somebody with the gun.
He also looks calm doing it. He doesn't look panicky. He doesn't look nervous. Like you look at the Amy Cooper case. You see someone who's panicking in response to feeling like she's ambushed. You don't have any of that when you see the video of this guy. This guy is calm, pulls the gun out, aims it, fires. That's a tough self-defense case.
I'm just trying to think. I immediately, the criminal side's going to play out. I immediately was just thinking to the liability of 9 News. How do they? Sorry,
it hurts. I was going to say one addendum. It hurts that he's unlicensed, as you mentioned.
Well, so that was my next question: is how does 9 News even hire an unlicensed pistol carrying security guard? I presume maybe they go through an agency and the agency is supposed to vet them. Maybe 9 News is supposed to vet them. I don't understand how any of this happens. I'm just waiting. I mean, I don't think it's a question of if, but rather when, and sooner than later, 9 News is going to see a massive civil suit.
There's going to be a wrongful death suit brought against them. And the discoveries will disclose that. It will depend on the scale of their insurance policy as to whether they can avoid discovery by the insurance company paying it off. But I can tell you, insurance companies hate to pay money on intentional tort cases. So, unless it's defamation where they've already, the only reason they exist is for that particular intentional tort. But they don't like assault cases, sexual assault, other cases. They don't like, they usually claim we don't indemnify that. In fact, in like California, often they can't. So it depends on the state. There's some state laws that actually prohibit insurance companies from insuring certain forms of torts.
Uncle Bubba says you don't bring a gun to a protest. Well, you do if you're a security guard, but not if you're an unlicensed security guard who's not legally, from what I understand, was not legally allowed to possess a firearm on him in that state. It looks like someone who, we were talking about the self-defense and instigating in previous streams. This looks like on its face right now, unless something changes, a dude who knows that he's armed, looking to instigate something so that he can discharge. There was a video, in fact, that I was watching a 9 News piece on it where they're running a video that shows the victim earlier on, talking abusively to someone who was recording him, as though that's relevant to what happened to him at that moment. Some people might think it is, some people might think it's not. But this is it's just another situation where you don't show up to a protest with a gun. This guy happened to be security, but that's not any protocol that any security is supposed to use that I know of. What else? Now we had one last one, I think. Hold on, we're doing good.
Previewing the debate.
Oh yeah,
and taking anybody's extra super chat questions.
Well, I'll try to get in non-super chat questions as well. When is the debate for anybody who doesn't know? Is it tomorrow?
It's the 22nd, so I want to say that's Thursday or Friday.
Dear God. Okay, so we have time. Preview for the debate. What lessons will have been learned from the first debate going into the second? Your prediction.
So 2 things. I review debates differently than other people. I tend to look at it as whether or not the In fact, I guess it was discussed with Eric Hunley in the behavior panel, which was fascinating. Actually, Chase Hughes had some good points because they do a behavior body language interpretation of the debates. That's great. I focus on it from three things. I think it's all about the challenger. I think everybody already knows who the incumbent is. So the whole question that people are asking to themselves is, can this challenger be president? Can they pass that threshold? And I think they're looking at three things. Two of them, I think almost all of them unconsciously, but one of them really unconsciously. So number one, they're looking at who handles stress well. Can this challenger handle stress well? Category two, can this challenger, do they communicate strength under pressure? And third, if I was in a jam, could this guy lie for me better than the incumbent? And the way I put it is this way. Imagine the person you care about the most in the world is kidnapped. And the only way you can get them free and protect them is to have somebody else, is to have one of these two people lie for you. They have to lie. That's the only way they can get them free. Who would you pick? And so I think that's an unconscious decision because what's interesting, Chase Hughes brought it up. He said the most popular people when they've done studies in high school are also rated as the best liars. So it actually, I thought it just applied presidentially. He made the point it's actually universal human nature. People trust, and it's a weird thing, but it actually makes sense if you think about it. People for leadership positions, they trust liars better. They don't trust a schmuck who can't lie well. They're like, that guy's screwed. We'll never get a good negotiation done. We'll get involved in some stupid war because they can't figure out how to lie to somebody. So I think so I'll be watching it to look at those three things. I think the Biden campaign and the Biden supporters believe that all he has to do is come across as competent and capable, and he will win election. That's why they're putting a lid on this whole week. Biden is not going to be appearing in public the rest of the week until the debate night, just to prep for the debate. I think they may. I'll be very curious to see whether they improve his. I think they prepared for him last time of thinking Trump would approach him like Hillary rather than like Jeb. They now know Trump will approach him like Jeb, so they'll probably prepare for a new one. But how good will they be? Particularly the Hunter Biden question and are you really dumb, Joe questions. Those are two questions Joe Biden has a long history of losing focus when they're asked. So the Trump badgered the heck out of him with those questions. The first debate, how do they prepare him for the second debate? So I'll just be curious as that from a tactical perspective, even though I don't think it impacts the election. The third is, will Trump change gears? Almost a guarantee. He always did. Now his moderator is someone I know. She hates Trump. She has a long history bashing Trump. So she'll be coming in and attacking him twice as much as Chris Wallace did. So, but Trump doesn't care. He thinks that plays to his anti-establishment populist image. How do you run as a change agent while you're still incumbent? When you are the incumbent, well, you have somebody from the establishment press spend all their time attacking you unfairly. He thinks that actually networks to his benefit because he went along with this choice. Whether he's right or not, you can make a debate. But that's my takeaway. I never pay attention to who they say won the debate. In almost every debate, they've always said the Democrat has won almost every single debate aside from Mitt Romney's first debate for the last 1990s.
They said that with the first Trump debate, and there were some polls within the Latino community who said that Trump won, whereas they're all saying, MSM is saying that Biden won. But now this is my question, because I'm going to bring up Brian Baird's question. Brian, laptop odds, if you were a betting man with that, what would your odds be? I suspect we're talking about referencing it, but Giuliani has a copy of the hard drive. There's no doubt that Trump knows everything that's on it. Mm-hmm. What are the chances, how quickly before he gets into what's on the laptop in the debate? And if he knows that there's something damning in there that is not yet public, the odds of him, alluding to it so that only the two of them get it, but that it indicates to the general public something, unspoken.
I'm sure that will happen. If I was advising Trump, I would prefer he substantively focus primarily on issues of war and trade, because I think that's the decisive vote in the working class North that will help him get reelected, where he has a huge policy edge, political edge over Biden. So that's what I'd be looking for. But Trump knows that talking about Hunter Biden gets Biden off his game. So he'll do it no matter, just for that reason. Aside from, and I think this time he'll try to maybe make some more substantive points, put the corruption aura label around Biden. But mostly it's because whenever he thinks Biden is able to hide his mental cognitive issues by resorting to a script. So he will constantly, whenever he sees Biden going to a script, He'll probably just interject. By the way, why is your son corrupt? So yeah, he's vicious. He's as vicious as it comes with this kind of thing. There's just no mercy when it comes to Trump. I mean, it was brutal. I mean, when he could take Joe Biden doing that great statement about his son Beau, and you for you to call all set up, and then right away Trump just turned around and no, I'm talking about your drug addict kid. That the drug addict one, the corrupt one. I don't know the other one. That's just vicious. I mean, that is mean. You would not want to be in a personal argument with this guy.
And I'm currently listening to Scott Adams win bigly, and even if I don't necessarily agree with everything in it, I mean, this is one of the things that he's saying is it's remorseless, and it's remorseless, but it's sort of what people want. At least his supporters. Other people are going to find it terrible, but goes back to what you said. Who do you want on your side in a bar fight, which is sort of what international geopolitics really is. Yes. This is an interesting question. Pink Sniper says, Trump rallies versus Biden rallies. Does the size of the rally turnout indicate how a candidate is doing? I've always been wondering that as well.
Historically, yes. So I look at a whole bunch of indicators. Polls are at the very bottom of the indicators I consider consequential. Been betting on presidential politics since I was a teenager. Used to get my pizza money betting on like sports and everything else when I was a kid. At a Christian school, no less. That's another story. But it's a good little Baptist school, and I was, though some of these trolls that were trying to bet me, I was going back and forth because Mama always told me not to bet with the kids who ride the short bus to school. So I have to think about that. But but I think the reason is because it shows enthusiasm, particularly for an incumbent election. So when because that tells you who's going to turn out and who's not. So when you rally size, yard signs, social media activity, and by the way, Nate Silver and other people admitted this early on in 2016, and then as soon as it started favoring Trump, they dropped it. If you go back and read in 2012, you'll see all these data types and the media types talking about, look at Obama's dominance in his rally size, look at Obama's dominance in yard signs, look at Obama's dominance on Facebook and Twitter. All of a sudden, they quit talking about it when all of a sudden Trump began to dominate that. And he's dominating that at crazy levels. I mean, I think even without the pandemic, I don't think Biden could get 50 people to show up for him.
No, I would tend to agree. I just think at the end of the day, there's 40% on both sides, maybe 35 who are going to vote one way or the other, don't need to show up to rallies. But it does show a certain enthusiasm, and it does instill a sense of enthusiasm versus instilling a sense of defeat.
Particularly who's excited. You want to see low turnout groups excited for you and not the other guy. So like if you have upper middle class people on both sides, like Romney in who cares? So Frank Luntz was making this mistake. What you want is that if you're a Democrat, you want millennial minorities really excited for you. If you're a Republican, you want working class voters, older working class voters very excited, because those are the groups that may or may not vote. Upper middle class people always vote no matter what. Old people always vote no matter what.
Now, Dapper Dave says, Viva, can you get to my super chat question regarding BLM becoming a political action committee?
Here's the thing with BLM. There's 20 of them. So they're funded like not as bad as Antifa, but similar. That was a sign, by the way, they did not have the best of intentions. They were not organized in a regular way. They had lots of funny money kind of structures. You had this organization here, this one over here, this one over here. Where their money was going was all a black box. So it looked like the Koch family. And by the way, I'm not saying that's just on the Democratic side. The Koch family does this extensively on the right. So you can find on the left and the right a lot of dark money places and spaces. And BLM was operating like a dark money entity. It's designed for you to not understand or know where the money is going or where it is gone or where it even came from most of the time.
Okay, very interesting. Now, there's a lot of questions coming in, and I kind of want to get to them. I'll get to Owen's question about the books at the end. We'll end with that right now. Dapper Day says, what does Barnes think about Fox News stated that more Democrats have already mail-in ballots than Republicans in the battleground states?
Yeah, that's because almost everybody's lazy about reading polls. So it's extraordinary. They're reading like the top line of polls, but not the internals. Massive, massive shift this year in voter intentions. So traditionally about the same number of Republicans as Democrats will vote early by some method, sometimes more absentee, sometimes more in person, depends on the state usually. But historically they've been about even. And in Gallup's polls, they have reported in advance about even. This year, Gallup reported record-setting numbers of Democrats are going to vote early and a record number of Republicans are not. So it went from being about 35% of the country on both sides was going to vote early to 62% of Democrats are going to vote early, and maybe a quarter of Republicans are going to vote early. If you look at individual state polls, those disparities get even wider. And in states that have had a recent history of political corruption, with Democratic governors and Democratic mayors controlling major cities like North Carolina, like Pennsylvania, you're seeing Republicans not want to vote early at all, and Democrats pouring out to vote early. So I've been my own view is early voting is a useless tea leaf. It has been forever. Read Sean Trendy on this. Even read Harry Enton and Nate Cohn and Nate Silver. They admit it's completely useless.
What percentage of the voting does early voting represent? Like we've like 1%?
It's varied cycle to cycle. I've never been a fan of it. When I was involved in Democratic politics back in the day and independent politics, I supported some Republicans too as a political consultant in Tennessee. I hated early voting because I didn't want my people voting early, because all it did was show the other side exactly how many votes they needed to get by election day. Mm-hmm. I preferred my people to wait until election day and let the idiots on the other side vote early, so I knew exactly how many ballots I needed. So some Republicans have wisened up to this in North Carolina and Pennsylvania, to some degree in parts of Florida. Michigan and Wisconsin, they're not used to political corruption, so I think they're voting anyway. But the key here is the only way I use early voting is for two things. Compare it to the polls. Were the polls accurate about what the partisan and demographic profile of the electorate is in the early voting electorate of people they claim have already voted? And second is are we seeing a surge of one group of another's low turnout group voting early? So young voters, African-American voters on the Democratic side, working class, rural white voters on the Republican side. And that's the only metric I use. I don't use it as partisan, because what's happening is all you're changing is when somebody votes, not whether they vote 90% of the time. And that's, one party's organized in one state, another party, who cares? Because when all you did is change when they voted, not whether they voted, you made zero impact. You just wasted money 9 times out of 10 and gave a sneak preview to the other side how many votes they needed. This is why I think Trump has gone back. I think this year he doesn't want people to vote early. He's been sporadic about what he's saying. He clearly doesn't want them to vote by mail. He really wants them to just pour out on election day. So that's the background of it. So that's why it really doesn't work. Now, from that standpoint, young vote is down, new vote is down. Compared to the polls. So the polls predicted 50 to 60 point advantages for Democrats in almost every state in the early vote, and they're up by 10 to 20 points everywhere. So that they're actually way off of their metrics. And the young vote is actually down. African-American vote, some places is down. It should be way up. So the new voters that they needed to get to sweep for the polls to be accurate is not happening. And the polls have been wildly wrong about what the early vote electorate looks like, which probably previews what's coming November 3rd.
All right. And then this is a good question on topic. Thoughts on Ice Cube working with Trump on the black community issues after Dem said we'll work with you after the election. Cube under heavy fire now. Well, that's an interesting response, which may not achieve its intended goal. But I respond in the chat, said, look at Amazing Lucas just put out a video with his opinion on this. It's an interesting insight. Robert, what's yours?
Yeah, I think same way. I think the reality is there's a huge problem with enthusiasm amongst working class African-American men in the Democratic Party. They're having in part, that's because there's a unusual number of crossovers for Trump. And I don't mean like 30, 40%. You hear these crazy numbers out there. That ain't happening. But for Trump, double digits is fantastic, period. To give people an idea, Obama won the African-American vote 97-3. So that's the metric you're trying to go down. Mm-hmm. And because he did, before the pandemic lockdowns, achieve record-setting unemployment for African-American men, he appeals to a lot of African-American men. Historically, Trump used to be popular within rap culture. So Ice Cube grew up with, Trump was money, Trump was success. That's how Trump was used in rap culture. There's even a Wesley Snipes line referencing Trump in one of the older movies. So he's always had some cultural inroads there. So that's they're mad that anybody dissents. And they really believe that they can have gatekeeping control. So that as long as the Ice Cubes of the world never dissent, as long as the Kanyes of the world never dissent, then all young black men will go in and vote Democratic. They don't understand they're losing gatekeeper control, and they have been for a while. What unites Section 230, the media's coverage of Biden, all of these other issues, is they're losing gatekeeper control over what information is trusted and believed by a wider range of the populace.
Yeah, okay, it's fascinating. Ian Mack says, "Love the stream as always. If you had to pick two worst, most obviously corruptions, negative actions by Biden to give lefty friends to a look at, what would you pick?" And then you know what? In fairness, ask the question of Trump as well. But no,
Sure.
so well, you pick two. What are the two biggies?
So, I mean, I think for Biden, it'll be hard for people to put. Biden is very good at what he does. So for me, Burisma, Ukraine, and what was going on in China are the
That's
two most apparent examples.
too
But
that's
a lot,
complicated. That in of itself will already be too complicated for 90% of the people to want to
and
understand.
that's the way. The simpler version is this: why do so many of Biden's family go into politics and get paid lots of money by foreign oligarchs when they have no talent in the fields they're getting paid for? So, I mean, that's the question I ask my lefty friends, and
Well,
they
and,
all know. They
and
all know at some level.
no, but and in fairness, they'll say the same thing of Trump now hiring his own children, and bringing them in on the campaign, bringing them to office. So I mean,
Oh yeah, and there's different arguments people can make with Trump. My thing with Trump is simple: the guy lost money by getting elected. So I mean, it's everybody else made money by getting elected. So as long as he lost money by getting elected, it's hard for me to say that that corruption was his motivation. If corruption was motivation, he wouldn't have run for president.
that's what I mean. That's what I mean. I used to listen to Howard Stern, and the funny thing about the lockdown is now I realize I can live very easily without Howard Stern in the morning. But one of the things he said in the beginning was, his advice to Trump was not to run for the president. It's going to ruin your life. You don't need it. Spend the rest of your golden years golfing. And to me, that was always like the best argument as to why I would not attribute negative intentions to him for having decided to do it. I understand everybody saying he did it to protect from liability, to protect from lawsuits. I mean, I understand those arguments. I just may not be convinced by them.
Yeah, there's everybody advising him said his brand was his best thing, and that he would lose half of his brand support and almost all of his upscale brand support. So that he just created a nightmare and put a target. And he always knew this. That's why he was reluctant to do it for the longest time. He only did it when he was 70 plus, because he knew the moment I do this, the money is gone. I'm going to lose the brand. I'm going to lose billions. And he was right about that. There was no way he would make money by running for president. And definitely not by getting elected.
No question. I'm just looking at a couple of other super chats if I can try to get to them. We got, why does Ice Cube get to advocate for black people's interests singularly, but white people don't? Yeah, I don't know. He's a spokes. He represents a group. I mean, there are spokespeople for various groups once you break them down beyond that top level. I mean, you have different groups within white people, religious, sexual orientation, all those things. So you do have people who have a platform and then want to use it. It's just amazing to see him get destroyed on social media for not exercising his platform the way he's not even exercising it in a pro-Trump way. He's just exercising it to the only party who seems to want to listen, which seems like a good strategic thing, as opposed to saying, wait until after the election, we'll talk to you, presupposing we have your vote already.
He represents an increasingly independent group of African-American men in his age bracket that don't trust the Democratic Party. Nowhere near Kanye level or independent, and nowhere near Trumpish, but don't trust the party. Now, he actually made libelous statements about Amy Cooper, in my view, but so that gives you an idea of his politics. Politics haven't fundamentally changed.
Well, it's the way celebrities do social. It's the way celebrities do big issues on social media. Top line, they don't know the details. They probably don't even know what they're saying that's wrong. It's one of the reasons why I'm very reluctant to even jump in on things that I don't have firsthand personally acquired knowledge on. There's just too much to know. And then even when you think you know it, there's one thing you don't know and it changes everything. There was one super chat, I can't bring it up. What do we think about changing the definition of words after depositions? Sexual preference now being identified as a derogatory word by Merriam-Webster.
It's incredibly Orwellian. It's the belief that if you control the language, you control people's thoughts, you control people's ideas, and that's why they're starting with the language. And
beyond that, you control the way people can discourse, because now you can't use certain words without immediately being written off and potentially banned from the very social media that controls the definition of the words in the first place. Orwellian, Kafkaesque, it's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. Now I think, okay, we're going to do two more because I hear noise coming down, and we've been lucky. If Trump wins, what are the chances now that he's seen enough of the swamp top to bottom that he will legitimately clean house?
I hope he puts better people in there. He needs to get around Mitch McConnell, who will be a major obstructive factor.
All right, and now to end it on the one, it was Owens, question was perfect time to end. Do you have? He says, Owen Jones. Sorry. What are this week's Barnes books and movie recommendations? Got laid off Thursday for lack of work due to COVID permit slowdown, so I've got the time.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. That's the reason he has that time. A lot of these lockdowns are ludicrous. I was arguing with my old great Quaker history professor, who used to call himself the founder of the anarchist redneck club of North Carolina, who was arguing with me because he comes from the left, which is fine. But he was trying to argue with me that certain lockdown policies were somehow populist. And I was like, I don't think so. I still disagree with him on that. But he needs to read the New York Times a little less. Good doc. But great man, great human being, taught me tons. He would recommend to people Nixon's the book by Gary Wills, Nixon Agonistes, because it explains a certain kind of form of conservatism, and you could even say populism, from a very idiosyncratic perspective. It helped explain to me the difference between Burkean conservatism rooted in a sort of kind of populism versus sort of new left, and why they have such a destructive impulse in the Marxist left, cultural Marxist left, politically Marxist left especially, and why they tend to be disconnected. Down and Out by George Orwell, and Down and Out in Paris and London, great books by Orwell explaining the real life of the poor, and then read his Road to a Wigan Pier, which explains the problem of socialism. As he famously said, the biggest problem with socialism is socialists, which was deeply insightful about the professional class usurping power in the political arena, and in the name of working class people doing harm to working class people. The Confessions of an Economic Hitman and the New Confessions of an Economic Hitman, right behind me to the left, by John Perkins. And in the same capacity, this book, Other People's Money, the real Business of Finance by John Kay, which gets into how Wall Street money really works, which will explain in part the Devon Archer scandal and its correlation to Hunter Biden. So all of those are good. Then the show The Wire, always fantastic, many different parts. The different movies we've already referenced throughout today, including, is it Shattered Glass? Is that the one about the reporters?
I'm fairly certain it's the movie. It's a great movie. It's got a couple of great actors. I forget their names. One of them is my favorite actor. Great movie.
So that's a fantastic one. I don't remember the movie. I'll find the title, by John Sayles, Sayles, about the way urban politics really works. A lot of the episodes of The Wire have a lot of good detail about that too, about the way, and that helps explain the Biden machine, how what his modus operandi would be, what evidence you could find, what evidence you wouldn't be able to find, its connection to Obama, how all that dynamics work. A lot of that once you have that context, you understand how to fill in the dots and how to connect the dots in the first place.
And speaking of the lockdowns, I mean, it's people don't appreciate the damage. The problem is one damage is intangible, and the other damage, you can have little charts that you make scare everybody day in and day out, and run and change the numbers on the chart. Not change the numbers, change the focus of the charts. So it goes from one shocking number, when those aren't so shocking anymore, bring up other shocking numbers and just drill it into people's heads day in and day out until they think, until they do it. We're in Quebec now. A lot of Quebec now is in the red zone. So, we can't have people into our house. I thought this irony the other day. I could literally meet my parents at a Starbucks, but I can't legally go into their house.
It's insanity. I should remember two other videos. The Clinton Cash, I think it's a free documentary out there by Peter Schweitzer, is very insightful for how a lot of these foreign policy U.S. money trails work. And a corollary one is that one that's on Blaze about Biden in China, about 40 minutes long. We'll also give you a good description. Schweitzer always does a better job. Rudy Giuliani, God bless his soul, he'll lay out a description on his YouTube thing. I don't know how he became a trial lawyer at times, because he's all over the place. It's like Rudy just forgot where he was 2 seconds ago. And I like Rudy, and Rudy follows me and other things. So yeah, I have disagreements with a lot of cases he did, but that's another story. I think the Michael Milken case problematic, Leona Helmsley case problematic. Some of what he did in the mob case is problematic, but but he is a very skilled lawyer, and he tries to put out a narrational story, but he can never stay focused. God bless him. But I think those documentaries are good little documentaries that will give you a good sense of a portrait of how to figure out how these scams and schemes and systems really operate.
Peter Sarsgaard is the actor. I had to look it up.
Yeah.
There is something soothing and relaxing about looking at him. He makes me calmer than I ordinarily am, and I can't remember his name, but Peter Sarsgaard is one of my favorite actors because He's soothing to watch, and he looks like a genuinely good person when, even as not as an actor. Okay, I mean, what do we do? Let's do this. Hold on. Let's see here. Okay, I can't bring up these. If we get into more, we're going to get into more. Robert, amazing. We were over 13,000 this week, which is the second highest, and in the absence of publicity by the SDNY. So it's good. People are loving this. I'm loving it. I'm learning, and it gives me an excuse to continually update my talent stack. My knowledge stack is what I wanted to use the word as. Okay. Moral hazard. Bottom line, is Biden going to win? You will have to watch People's Pundit tomorrow at 2:00, or follow Robert on Twitter. He's not shy about it. And apparently Twitter is on fire. Maybe more news. I'm going to go check it out after this and after I put a couple of kids to bed. Everybody, thank you very much for tuning in. This is turning into a wonderful ritual for Sunday nights, and I'm happy people are liking it. I'm happy people are getting stuff out of it. It really makes me happy, genuinely. Never thought I would actually find this purpose in life, but it's great, and I get to learn more. Okay, everyone, for the super chats, if I didn't get to them, thank you in any case for the support. Thank you for participating. Thank you for the comments. Robert, stick around. We'll say our proper goodbyes. I turned this into a podcast. It's on the podcast things. It's called Viva and Barnes Law for the People. Highlights come out tomorrow. It might be difficult to do highlights on this, but I'll get a few highlights. And that is it. Everybody, enjoy what's left of the weekend. Next week is undoubtedly going to be another big week in law. See you soon. Robert, thank you very much. End broadcast.